You've been too hard on yourself for too long, carrying guilt like a shadow that never leaves, replaying old mistakes like a broken record, believing the lie that you must be perfect to deserve peace. They told you forgiveness has to come from someone else, that you have to earn it, beg for it, wait for it. But no one ever taught you how to forgive the one person who truly needs it. You. Buddhism tells a softer truth. It doesn't punish you for your past, it teaches you to hold it gently, like a scar that no longer hurts. The Buddha never said you have to be flawless. He only said, be aware, be kind, and begin again. Tonight, you're not here to run from your thoughts. You're here to set them free. This isn't about pretending the pain never happened. It's about finally letting it go. As you listen, something inside will start to soften. The tightness in your chest will melt. The harsh voice in your head will grow quiet. And in its place, a new voice will whisper, you did the best you could. And now, it's time to rest. These aren't just teachings, they're gentle medicine, ancient wisdom that still heals. A quiet path back to yourself. So if you're ready to stop punishing yourself, if you're ready to feel light again, if you're ready to forgive the one person you've never been able to, let's begin. Karma has been one of the most misunderstood teachings, often used not to awaken us, but to shame us. People hear the word and immediately think it means punishment, that their suffering must mean they deserve it, that they're being paid back for something they did wrong. But that's not what karma truly means, not in the words of the Buddha, not in the heart of the teaching. Karma, in its true form, is about cause and effect. That's all. It's not moral punishment. It's not spiritual revenge. It simply says, what you do, think, and say carries energy, and that energy creates ripples in your life and in the lives of others. That's not a threat, it's a doorway. The reason this becomes dangerous is when people use karma to explain pain. Something bad happens, and you tell yourself, it's my karma, I must have done something to deserve it. And that's where the trap begins. That's when karma becomes a chain. You start blaming yourself not just for your actions, but for your emotions. For being sick, for being sad, for being left. And slowly you lose compassion for yourself because you're convinced that your suffering is your fault. That if something hurts, it must be because you did something wrong. That's not karma. That's internalized shame, dressed up as spirituality. When the Buddha taught about karma, he didn't speak about blame. He spoke about intention. In the Buddha, oldest teachings, karma isn't just action, it's volitional action. That means it's not just what you do, it's what you meant to do, your motives, your awareness. That's why two people can do the same thing and create very different karma, because their hearts are in different places. It's not about what's visible. It's about the consciousness behind the act. So when you start blaming yourself for every hardship, for every loss, you're using karma in a way it was never meant to be used. Karma is not a courtroom. It's not a scorecard. It's a flow of energy, always moving, always able to shift. This misunderstanding gets worse when people believe that guilt is spiritual, that feeling bad means they are becoming better. But guilt, when it's left to grow without understanding, doesn't make you wise. It makes you smaller. It narrows your heart. It disconnects you from others. True Buddhist practice doesn't ask you to feel bad, it asks you to wake up. And waking up doesn't mean judging yourself more harshly. It means seeing clearly. It means realizing when you've caused harm. Yes, but also recognizing when you haven't. And it means not dragging yourself through suffering just to feel like you've atoned. That's not clarity, that's self-punishment. You may have been taught that you're supposed to suffer through your karma, that healing has to hurt. But the Buddha never taught that suffering was a sign of growth. He taught that suffering is what happens when we don't see clearly. That we suffer because of attachment, not because of guilt. That our pain comes from craving, aversion, and ignorance, and from divine judgment. And the moment you begin to see that, the moment you understand where your pain is truly coming from, the healing starts. If you've ever found yourself thinking, everything bad happens to me because I deserve it, know that. This thought isn't spiritual, it's wounding, and it keeps you stuck. It makes you afraid to trust joy, afraid to rest, afraid to love yourself. You become convinced that if you're happy, punishment must be coming, so you self-sabotage, you pull away from what's good, you make yourself small. That's not karma. That's fear. And fear was never the goal. True karma gives you back your power. It says, if your actions shape your life, then you can begin again. You can choose better. You can plant new seeds, starting now. Karma is not here to chain you to the past. It's here to invite you into the present. Every breath, every word, every choice can shift your path. Not because you're trying to cancel out some cosmic debt, but because you finally understand how energy works. And when you act with love, that love returns. When you act with compassion, you become lighter. That is the heart of karma, not fear, but freedom. But here's where the trap deepens. When we feel pain, we start searching for reasons. And when we're spiritual, we often turn to karma as the explanation. We think, I'm anxious because I did something wrong in a past life. I lost this person because I wasn't good enough in a former life. And this can feel comforting at first. It gives us a sense of order in the chaos. But it can quickly become a prison, because now every painful emotion becomes suspect, every setback becomes punishment, and you begin to distrust yourself even more. It's true that karma can ripple through lifetimes, but that's not meant to make you paranoid. It's meant to show you the vastness of your journey, that you're more than just this body, this moment, this version of you. And in that vastness, you're still evolving. You're not being punished for who you are. You're being shaped by experience. And when you hold that truth with tenderness, even the hardest things begin to soften. There's also a danger in taking too much responsibility. When you overown your pain, you start thinking you caused everything. That everything in your life is your fault. But not everything is karma. Some things are just life. Other people's actions, random events, collective patterns. If you try to carry all of it, you'll collapse. So take what's yours, learn from it, but don't carry what isn't meant for you. Don't confuse being spiritual with being self-blaming. Now let's talk about intention again, because that's the piece people miss. Karma is rooted in intention, not outcome. You could try to help someone and it backfires. You could make a mistake while trying to protect yourself. You could lash out because you were scared. These aren't signs of evil, they're signs of being human. And karma sees that. Karma understands that awareness changes everything. That once you understand what drove your action, you're already becoming someone new. And that shift, that's the real work. That's the healing. If you've ever told yourself, I must suffer to balance the scales, please stop. Suffering does not make you holy. Awareness does. Kindness does. Choosing peace when it's easier to choose. Punishment, that's the practice. That's what breaks the cycle. Even if you've hurt others in the past, even if you've made choices you regret, the way forward is not self-hate. It's wisdom, it's clarity, it's doing the work to understand yourself, and then doing the work to make different choices from that understanding. That's how karma works, not through pain, through presence. When you believe karma is about deserving, you live in fear. But when you realize karma is about patterns, you start to relax. You see, it's not about being good enough, it's about seeing clearly. And when you see clearly, you start planting different seeds. You start speaking more gently. You start forgiving faster. Not because you're afraid, but because you finally understand. So tonight, begin again. Lay down the weight of punishment. Release the belief that you need to suffer more. You've suffered enough. You've judged yourself long enough. Now it's time to shift, to choose differently, to let karma be what it truly is, a teacher, not a jailer. Every time you forgive yourself, the cycle weakens. Every time you respond with love instead of shame, the future changes. And every time you breathe into the truth of the moment, you're rewriting the story of your life. You are not being punished. You are being invited to wake up, to soften, to live with more kindness than you thought you deserved. But you do deserve it. You always have. Keep listening. You're just getting started. And now we go deeper. You've started to unlearn the weight of misunderstood karma, to loosen the tight grip of guilt pretending to be truth. But there, 39S, something underneath that still keeps pain. Alive, something hidden in the way you speak to yourself, in the labels you cling to, in the story you keep replaying about who you are and who you've been. That story feels permanent, solid, like your past has shaped you in a way that can't be undone. But what if the story is made of smoke? What if the you blame, the you resent, isn't even real in the way you thought? This is where the next teaching leads. Anattha, truth of non-self. Not a theory, not an abstract idea, but a direct doorway to freedom from shame. Not the kind of freedom that pretends things never happened, but the kind that sees clearly and still chooses compassion. You've been taught to believe you are a fixed person, that your past created a solid identity, and now you're stuck with it, that once you've failed, you are a failure, that once you've caused harm, you are harmful, that once you've made a mistake, you are a mistake. But this belief is the foundation of suffering. The moment you say, I am this, or I am always that, you're not just describing yourself, you're trapping yourself. You're turning a moment into a lifelong sentence. But Buddhism gently reveals the truth. There is no fixed self to hold all that pain. There is no solid you that has to carry every version of who you've been. When the Buddha spoke about non-self, he wasn't erasing your humanity. He wasn't saying you don't exist. He was pointing to the way we create a false idea of ourselves and then suffer because of it. We say, I am angry, or I am broken. And in that moment, we glue the emotion to our identity. We believe that who we are and what we feel are the same, but they're not. Your thoughts change, your body changes, your emotions rise and fall. Everything that you call you is in motion, and what moves is not fixed. What moves can change. When you see clearly that there is no unchanging self, the shame you've been holding begins to lose its shape, because if the you who made that mistake no longer exists in the same way, then why are you still punishing this moment for a version of yourself that's already gone? Non-self does not mean you. avoid responsibility. It means you take responsibility without turning it into self-condemnation. You see, what happened, you learn. You adjust, but you don't use it to harden against yourself. Let's go further. Most self-blame doesn't come from what you did. It comes from who you think you are. You believe you, 39, not worthy, so everything becomes evidence. A forgotten text, a bad conversation, a missed opportunity, it all confirms a fixed identity. I'm not good enough. But the belief in a solid self turns normal human flaws into proof of failure. And that's why it hurts so much. You're not just remembering what happened. You're feeding a belief about your identity. Non-self interrupts that belief. It pulls you out of the false certainty of always and never. It says, you, 39, not your past emotions. You, 39, not your worst day. You, 39, not the story you've told yourself again and again. That story might feel familiar, but it isn't truth, it's habit. And like any habit, it can change. This is where self-forgiveness becomes real. When you no longer hold on to a fixed identity, there, 39, space to breathe. There, 39, room to see that the person who made that choice was caught in their own confusion, their own fear, their own limitations. And because everything changes, the one who is listening now, the one who seeks peace, is already not the same. That difference is real. That shift is freedom. But letting go of a fixed self doesn't mean becoming blank or detached. It means becoming more precise, more honest, more awake. You start to see your habits without collapsing into them. You notice your patterns without turning them into permanent traits. And when a thought arises, I'll never get it right, I always mess things up, you meet it with curiosity instead of belief, because now you know. Thoughts are events, not facts. Emotions are experiences, not definitions. This shift doesn't just help with shame, it transforms how you relate to everything. You begin to respond instead of react. Because if there, 39, no fixed, you, there, 39, also no fixed enemy, no fixed failure, no fixed curse. Everything becomes more fluid, more workable. You become less rigid, less defensive, less afraid of being exposed. You no longer have to protect a solid identity. You just meet the moment and respond with what is needed. That is wisdom. That is forgiveness in action. What keeps you stuck is the belief that change is a betrayal of your identity. That you can, 39, heal, because that would mean denying what you've been through. But healing doesn't deny anything. It just no longer clings to it. And when you no longer cling to what hurts, it begins to soften. When you no longer define yourself by your trauma becomes part of your story, not the whole book. Some people resist this teaching because they think it's too abstract. But look at your own experience. Right now, if you pause and ask yourself, who am I exactly? Can you answer it in a way that doesn't change tomorrow? The answer shifts depending on your mood, your memories, your surroundings. And that's not a flaw. That's freedom. You're not stuck as one version. You're alive. You're moving. You're growing. When you realize there's no fixed you, the part of you that's been clinging to guilt starts to unravel. Because guilt only makes sense when you believe there, 39, one static person to carry it. But if the self is constantly shifting, then the only thing that matters is what you choose next. The person you become by holding on is not the same as the person you become by letting go. And the one who chooses compassion is never the same as the one who chose harm. That's not denial, that's clarity. This also helps with regret. Regret thrives when you believe your past defines you. But if the self is not solid, then your regret is not chained to an identity. It's simply a response to awareness. It can guide you without drowning you. It can point you back to your values without poisoning your heart. And when regret becomes a teacher instead of a jailer, forgiveness happens quietly, without force. Even the voice in your head that criticizes you isn't fixed either. It's a collection of echoes. Things you've heard, fears you've absorbed, moments you never questioned. But voices can change. They do change. And as you continue practicing awareness, that voice becomes softer, more like a reminder, less like a threat. Let's go deeper still. Non-self is not about emptiness in a hollow sense. It's about interdependence. The recognition that everything you are is shaped by causes and conditions. Your fears came from somewhere. Your defenses were learned. Your patterns were shaped. And when you see that, you stop blaming yourself for being shaped. You stop condemning yourself for what was never fully in your control. You didn't choose your childhood. You didn't design your nervous system. You didn't ask for trauma. But you are here now. You are listening. You are understanding. That means you're already different, and that difference matters. Seeing through the illusion of a fixed self doesn't make you weak. It makes you compassionate toward yourself, toward others. Because when you no longer see yourself as a fixed thing, you stop seeing others that way too. You stop holding grudges. You stop labeling people by their worst moments. You stop defining them by how they hurt you. That doesn't mean you forget. It means you soften. And when you soften, healing becomes possible not just for you, but for everyone you meet. This is the quiet power of anatta. It dissolves the heavy armor you've built around your pain. It doesn't ask you to erase your past. It simply says, stop clinging to it. Let it rest. Let it breathe. Let the self you think you are open like a hand instead of closing like a fist. Because when you open, even a little, life moves through you again. The past begins to release its grip. You begin to see yourself not as a fixed point, but as a field of possibilities. Not as a broken statue, but as flowing water, always in motion, always becoming. This is where real forgiveness lives. Not in pretending you've never been hurt, not in denying you ever hurt someone, but in knowing that none of those things can define the mystery of what you are. You are not your name, not your history, not your thoughts or feelings or memories. You are the awareness that notices all of it, and in that awareness, you are already free. So when shame arises, don't fight it, just see it. Don't say, I am ashamed. Say, shame is here. That simple shift breaks the chain. Because the moment you stop identifying with it, you stop feeding it. And what you stop feeding begins to fade. Forgiveness, in this light, is not something you achieve. It's something that happens when the illusion of a solid, unchanging self dissolves. When you stop being at war with yourself, you return to the flow of reality. You rest in what is, instead of clinging to what was. And what is right now is awareness, breath, presence, no shame, no punishment. Just this moment, clean and quiet, waiting to be lived. And now that you've tasted this space, this lightness, this truth, keep going. There's more to see, more to let go, and more to become. Once you stop clinging to who you think you are, something quiet begins to surface. Beneath the labels, beneath the roles, beneath all the stories you've told yourself about your identity, there is something softer, not a blank space, not an emptiness, but a tenderness you may have ignored. A quiet presence, still holding the wounds you forgot to tend to. It's not just about what you've done or who you've been. It's about the parts of you that never got a chance to heal, the ones you've silenced, dismissed, or punished, not because you were cruel, but because you thought they made you weak. Now that the false weight of a fixed self has started to dissolve, you, 39, were more able to see what was hiding. Underneath it, the child within, the vulnerable, frightened part of you that's been trying to speak for years without words. And this part doesn't need judgment. It needs love, not perfection, not spiritual bypassing, just simple, patient, consistent love. That's where metta enters. Metta is not a feeling. It's a practice, a deliberate choice to offer unconditional friendliness to yourself and to others. It isn't based on what someone deserves. It's not a reward. It's a gift. And when you turn this toward the parts of yourself you've rejected, it becomes healing in its purest form, not fixing, not changing, just offering warmth where coldness used to be. You may have learned to talk to yourself in harsh tones. Maybe you thought that was strength. Maybe you believed self-criticism would keep you from repeating mistakes. Or maybe you picked it up from other caregivers who used shame instead of support, peers who confused ridicule with connection. Over time, those voices became your own. You started speaking to yourself the way others once did. And in doing so, the inner child, the real one, still alive in memory and body, was pushed aside, told to toughen up, to disappear, to grow up fast. But that child never left. That part of you is still carrying unmet needs, not childish demands, human needs, safety, belonging, gentleness. And unless you learn to meet those needs with kindness, they leak out sideways, through anxiety, through defensiveness, through quiet sadness that you can't explain, through the way you shrink around people or overcompensate for love. Metta is how you stop running from that. It's how you turn inward and say, I see you now. The wounded self does not need analysis. It doesn't need logic. It doesn't even need solutions. It needs presence. It needs to be held, not fixed. And this goes against what most of us were taught. We were told to be strong, to move on, to stop being dramatic. So we learned to hide our softer parts. But those hidden parts still shape how we see ourselves. If you grew up believing you were a burden, you might still carry that belief in every relationship. If you were made to feel invisible, you might overachieve just to prove you matter. These patterns are 39. T. Weakness they. 39. Unhealed memories. And metta is the ars medicine. When you practice loving kindness, you're not pretending everything is okay. You're acknowledging that, despite everything, you still deserve care. Not because you've done enough, not because you've proven yourself, but simply because you exist. This is radical, because it breaks the belief that love has to be earned, that you're only worthy if you never mess up. Metta says, even when you're afraid, you are lovable. Even when you're lost, you are worthy. Even when you feel like a failure, you still belong. Offering metta to your inner child means letting go of the adult mask for a moment. Not to regress, not to avoid, but to be real. It means sitting quietly with the parts of you that still carry pain. The younger self who didn't understand why they were treated unkindly. the teenage self who had to act strong while falling apart. The early adult who kept smiling while quietly wondering if anything would ever feel safe. These selves aren't illusions. They live in your nervous system, in your reactions, in the way your body tightens when you feel misunderstood. When you offer loving kindness to these versions of yourself, you, 39, not just healing emotions, you're calming the body. You're softening survival responses that have been running for years. Metta changes your relationship with your past by showing you that you can meet it with warmth, not fear. That memory doesn't have to hurt every time you revisit it. That you can be the safe space you never had. Start small. You don't have to say big, sweeping affirmations. Begin with phrases like, "I'm here now," or "You're allowed to feel this," or "You did nothing wrong." Speak to yourself the way you would speak to a child crying in the dark. Not with lectures, with presence, with a calm tone, with patience. This might feel unnatural at first. That's okay. You're not doing it wrong. You're just entering a space that's been ignored. And sometimes silence resists at first, but keep showing up. Loving kindness is also about consistency. You don't have to wait until you feel worthy. The act of offering metta is what begins to shift worthiness from an idea into an experience. Each time you say, "May I be safe, may I be held, may I be well," you're not casting a spell, you're building a habit. And over time, that habit becomes a new voice in your mind, a counterbalance to all the harshness you once absorbed. You'll begin to notice changes in small, unexpected ways. You'll speak more gently to yourself after a mistake. You'll forgive yourself quicker. You'll feel less urgency to prove something. And slowly, the grip of self-rejection will loose, not because you pushed it away, but because you finally gave it what it always needed: warmth. There's a depth to this work that words often can't touch. Sometimes the body will remember things before the mind does. You might feel sadness arise during loving kindness practice without a clear reason. Don't chase it. Don't explain it away. Just sit with it. Let the presence be enough. Healing isn't always loud. Sometimes it's just the quiet recognition. This hurts, and I'm not abandoning myself this time. That's metta in action. The power of this practice is that it makes space for contradiction. You can be both healing and hurting. You can feel both shame and softness. You can carry grief and still grow. Metta doesn't erase the difficult parts. It lets them exist without dominating your identity. You are no longer the child who wasn't seen. You are now the one who sees. That shift, subtle, profound, is what begins to rewrite everything. There will be moments when your old habits come back, when you speak harshly to yourself out of reflex. That doesn't mean the practice isn't working. It means your nervous system is showing you where to pour more love. The goal is not perfection. The goal is returning again and again to kindness, until kindness feels like home. Sometimes people ask, but isn't this just self-pity? The answer is no. Pity looks down. Metta walks beside. Pity keeps you stuck. Loving kindness helps you rise. There's nothing weak about turning toward your pain with compassion. In fact, it may be the most courageous thing you ever do, because it means facing what others ignored. It means showing up for yourself in ways no one else ever did. There's also a misconception that metta is about liking yourself. But liking is an emotion. It comes and goes. Metta is deeper. It's a stance, a posture of care. You don't have to like every part of yourself to Love those parts with presence. Just like a parent doesn't always enjoy their child's behavior, but still wraps them in a blanket when they're crying. That's the level of love we're working with, the kind that stays, even when things are messy. As you continue this practice, you might notice a shift in how you see others too. The more you meet your own inner wounds with compassion, the less reactive you become to other people's behavior. You begin to see that everyone carries pain. Everyone has an inner child. And sometimes, when someone lashes out, they're just protecting a part of themselves that was never loved. This doesn't mean you excuse harm, but it helps you respond without hardening. Metta creates safety, not in the world, but inside. And when you feel safe within yourself, you stop begging for safety from others. You stop bending yourself to be accepted. You stop hiding your truth just to feel enough, because you've finally come home to yourself, not just the parts that shine, but the parts that tremble, the parts that still remember what it felt like to be left behind. Those parts are welcome now. And here's something most people don't know. Your inner child doesn't need you to be perfect. They just need you to be consistent, to show up, to stop leaving, to say, even in silence, I will not abandon you again. Every time you return to loving kindness, you make that promise louder. And one day, the parts of you that used to hide will start to come forward, not with fear, but with trust. That's how healing begins, quietly, in the background, like light slowly filtering into a room you forgot was there. And with that light comes space. Space for rest, space for self-acceptance, space to no longer need fixing, because you finally understand. What needed healing wasn't brokenness, it was neglect. And now that neglect is over. You're here. You're listening. You're learning to love the parts of you that were always waiting for this moment. That's enough. And from here, the path only opens wider. When you begin meeting the forgotten parts of yourself with loving kindness, something starts to shift. The shame doesn't vanish, but it softens. The harshness doesn't disappear, but it loses its sharp edge. You start to feel moments of peace, not because everything is resolved, but because you're no longer running from yourself. That deep self-acceptance creates space, but in that space, something else quietly rises. Memory. Some memories return like whispers, others hit like waves. They don't ask for permission. They show up when you feel safe enough to finally feel. And this is where many people get stuck. They think to forgive, they have to forget. That healing means erasing, that peace means silence. But real healing is not forgetting. It's learning to hold what happened with presence instead of pain. Mindfulness doesn't erase the past, it helps you carry it differently. So many people try to heal by pushing things away. They bury the memory. They pretend it didn't matter. They call it letting go. But underneath, they're just avoiding. And avoidance is exhausting. It keeps the wound alive beneath the surface. It shows up in your body, your reactions, your relationships. Until you face the memory directly with softness, with breath, with presence, it keeps holding power over you. Mindfulness is not about controlling your thoughts. It's not about stopping the memory from coming back. It's about meeting it in a new way, without judgment, without panic, without believing the story that the memory defines who you are. When a difficult moment from the past rises, mindfulness invites you to feel it without becoming it, to observe without identifying, to breathe instead of react. This is one of the most misunderstood aspects of healing. People think if they remember what hurt them, they're not moving forward. They believe that remembering is the same as being stuck. But memory itself is not the problem. It's what we attach to it. It's how we interpret it. When you meet memory with mindfulness, you're not trapped in the past. You're freeing yourself from its grip, because now you're seeing it clearly, without the noise. Forgiveness without forgetting doesn't mean dragging the past into every moment. It means seeing your past clearly enough that it no longer blinds you. You begin to separate what happened from what you've added. The shame, the labels, the conclusions, those were layers built afterward. And mindfulness gently peels those layers back. Not all at once, not forcefully, but with each breath, each pause, each act of presence. A little more of the pain becomes workable. Some memories are sharp because they never had a safe place to land. They were carried in silence, without support. And when the mind feels unsafe, it traps those memories in patterns of fear. That's why certain thoughts trigger your body. That's why old moments feel fresh, even after years. Mindfulness offers that safe place. It doesn't rush to fix or explain. It just holds. And when something is held with care, it begins to soften. Even pain responds to kindness. You might wonder how it's possible to forgive someone or yourself while still remembering what happened. The answer is in how you relate to the memory. If the memory still defines you, if it still tells you who you are, then yes, it will feel impossible. But when you see that memory is a part of your story, not the whole, you begin to loosen the knot. You don't have to forget. You just have to stop identifying so tightly. Mindfulness gives you tools to do that. The first is observation. You learn to notice your thoughts without jumping into them. The memory arises, and instead of spinning into it, you watch, you name it. This is sadness. This is regret. This is fear. That naming isn't detachment. It's clarity. You are saying, this is what is here, not who I am. The second tool is breath. Simple, steady breath. It anchors you in the present. It reminds your body that it is safe, that the memory is not happening again, that you are here now. So many people relive the past, not because they want to, but because their nervous system hasn't felt safe enough to let it move. Breath creates that safety, one inhale at a time. The third tool is compassion. This changes everything. When the memory arises, when the mistake comes back, when the shame returns, you meet it not with rejection, but with care. You say, this hurts, and I will stay. That's what heals. Not erasing the past, not denying it, but staying with it without abandoning yourself. There's something incredibly powerful that happens when you stop trying to forget. You start to understand. You see why you did what you did. You see why others acted the way they did. This isn't about justification. It's about context. And context is essential for healing, because when you understand the why, you stop blaming the who. This is especially important when you've harmed others. Forgetting isn't accountability. Real accountability means remembering and responding with integrity. Mindfulness helps you hold the memory of what you did without drowning in guilt. It teaches you to hold space for growth, to repair what can be repaired, to apologize with sincerity, not shame, and most of all, to not repeat what caused harm. You'll also start to see the memories you've avoided aren't always what you thought. Sometimes, when we finally look closely, the memory changes shape. What we thought was our fault was actually survival. What we thought was weakness was just exhaustion. What we thought was failure was a cry for help. Mindfulness doesn't rewrite history, but it reveals what was hidden beneath the noise. It's important to say that some memories are traumatic, deeply painful, and mindfulness is not about forcing yourself to relive those memories. It's about creating enough presence to meet what arises naturally. If something feels too big, that's not weakness, that's intelligence. You move slowly, you take breaks, you work with support. Healing is not a race. It's a relationship with yourself, with your past, with your breath. As you deepen your mindfulness practice, you start noticing something else. The memory itself may remain, but its grip loosens. The edges soften. You start to see more than just the pain. You remember who else was there. You remember what you learned. You see how far you've come. This doesn't mean the wound disappears, but it means the wound no longer defines the whole body. And then something unexpected happens. Gratitude starts to rise, not for the pain itself, but for the strength you built around it, for the wisdom it gave you, for the person you've become by walking through it. This is not toxic positivity, it's deep perspective. It's knowing you can carry memory without collapsing under it. You may notice that memories come back at certain times. Anniversaries, smells, songs, words. This is not a sign of failure. It's the body remembering. Instead of pushing it away, meet it with breath, with kindness. Say to yourself, it's okay that this still hurts, and then let the moment pass. Because all things pass, even the sharpest memories. Sometimes people try to rush forgiveness because they think it will make the memory go away. But true forgiveness is what happens when you stop needing the memory to disappear, when you allow it to exist and choose peace anyway. You forgive not to forget, but to be free. Mindfulness shows you how, not in big dramatic ways, but in the small moments when you pause instead of react, when you breathe instead of blame, when you hold instead of push away. This builds over time. And before you realize it, the thing that once controlled you is now something you can carry lightly. There is one more layer that mindfulness touches the future, because how you hold your past shapes what you expect from life. If you believe you're still defined by what happened, you'll limit what's possible. But if you meet your past with clarity and compassion, the future starts to open. You stop waiting to be punished. You stop expecting to fail. You begin to trust yourself again. And that trust changes everything. You don't need to forget your past to move forward. You just need to stop letting it own you. Mindfulness gives you the space to remember without being pulled under. It teaches you to witness your own story with presence and care. And from that witnessing, a new story begins to form, not one that erases the past, but one that carries it with grace. So when the old memories rise again, and they will welcome them, you don't have to like them, but you don't have to fear them either. Sit with them, breathe, and say gently to yourself, I can remember without reliving. I can feel without becoming lost. I can hold the past without letting it hold me. You've come this far, and you're not done. The path is still open, and the next steps are waiting, steady, clear, and kind. Keep walking. The memories don't hold you anymore, not like they once did. You've learned how to stay present without drowning, how to remember without shrinking, how to sit with pain without letting it define you. But even now, even after all that softening, something underneath keeps you restless. A quiet pressure, a subtle voice that tells you you're still not there yet, that no matter how much you heal, it's not enough, that you should be better by now, that you should feel more peaceful, more disciplined, more evolved. And without realizing it, you start to chase an image that's been quietly shaping your brooding, suffering all along the version of you that you think you should be, the perfect one. This version looks like control, like balance, like constant calm. It's the person you imagined you, 39D, become once you finally figured everything out. The person who never overreacts, never gets triggered, never makes a mistake. The one who's always compassionate, always mindful, always clear. It's quiet, how it forms. Sometimes it's built from spiritual teachings, sometimes from childhood dreams, sometimes from survival, but once it's there, it starts driving everything. Every choice, every standard, every disappointment. It becomes a ruler you measure yourself against every day. And the more you measure, the more you find yourself lacking. This is where forgiveness gets blocked. Because as long as you're comparing yourself to who you should be, there's no room to accept who you are. The present version of you becomes something to tolerate or fix, not something to care for. Your mistakes feel bigger, your progress feels slower, your emotions feel like failures. And without even realizing it, you're not trying to forgive yourself, you're trying to replace yourself, to become someone else entirely. That pressure isn't just tiring, it's damaging. It tells you that if you fall short of the ideal, you're not worthy. That love is conditional. That peace has to be earned. That until you become the ideal version of yourself, you're not allowed to rest. This is where perfectionism hides, not in clean lines or neat schedules, but in the belief that you're always supposed to be more than you are. The idea of the ideal self can look like growth. It wears the language of self-improvement, but it has a sharp edge. It turns the present into a problem. It makes healing another project to master, and it convinces you that the goal is to become flawless instead of becoming real. The truth is, forgiveness begins not when you change into someone better, but when you stop expecting yourself to be anything other than human. Real healing comes when you stop reaching forward and start turning inward. When you stop chasing a polished version of yourself and start tending to the messy, honest one that's right here. Perfectionism isn't about high standards, it's about fear. It's the fear that if you let your guard down, if you show your flaws, if you stop performing, you'll lose love, you'll lose safety, you'll lose value. So you keep trying. You try to think the right thoughts, say the right words, feel the right feelings, and when you can't, you hide, you isolate, you pretend, and then you feel ashamed for pretending. The cycle deepens. Abandoning the ideal self doesn't mean giving up on growth. It means changing your definition of growth. It means realizing that real growth is sometimes invisible, that it doesn't always look like strength or wisdom. Sometimes it looks like crying, sometimes it looks like saying no, sometimes it looks like not knowing what to do next. And none of that means you're failing, it means you're living. One of the quiet traps of perfectionism is how it distorts time. It makes you feel like you're always late, like you should have learned this already, like you should have healed faster. But time in healing is not linear. There's no finish line. There's no deadline, there's only rhythm, and your rhythm is not wrong. You are not behind, you are not slow, you're just moving at the pace your body and heart can handle. Letting go of the ideal self also means letting go of constant judgment, because when you're chasing perfection, every moment becomes a test. How did I respond? Did I react too much? Was that loving enough? And over time, you stop being able to feel life directly. You're always watching yourself, measuring yourself. But real presence, the kind that creates peace, only happens when you stop performing. When you stop needing to be impressive, when you stop trying to prove that you're okay, and just let yourself be. There's something deeply healing in being ordinary, not in a dull way, but in an honest way, in not needing to be special to be worthy, in not needing to have all the answers to be wise, in not needing to be perfectly healed to deserve rest. When you drop the image of perfection, what's left is sincerity. And sincerity is what allows connection to yourself, to others, to the moment. If you're always trying to become someone else, you can't fully be here. You can't grieve properly. You can't celebrate fully. You can't feel deeply, because everything is filtered through the question, is this how I'm supposed to be? But there is no supposed to be. There is only what's true, what's real. And when you stop comparing that to an ideal, you start to find peace. The body holds the ideal too, in the way you tense when you feel judged, in the way you collapse when you feel like you failed, in the exhaustion you carry from trying so hard to be better. Letting go isn't just a mental shift, it's a full body release. It's the exhale after years of holding your breath. It's allowing yourself to be seen, not when you're perfect, but when you're honest. Forgiveness becomes possible when you see yourself without the lens of the ideal. When you look at your younger self, not through criticism, but through compassion. When you remember what you were trying to protect, what you didn't know, what you were hoping for, what you were afraid of. And instead of saying, I should have known better, you say, that was hard, and I see now. The ideal self is often shaped by fear. The fear of rejection, of not being loved, of being too much or not enough. But those fears lose power when you face them directly, when you admit them, when you say, I'm scared, instead of pretending to be unaffected. That honesty dissolves the need to be ideal, because you realize you don't need to be fearless to be whole, you just need to be real. Even in spiritual practice, the ideal self can take over. You start thinking you always need to be calm, always compassionate, always centered. But spirituality is not about being above your emotions. It's about meeting them with presence. The goal is not to be untouched by life. It's to be open to life, to feel everything and still remain kind. Letting go of the ideal self also changes how you relate to others. You stop projecting your shame onto them. You stop judging them for not meeting impossible standards. You allow them to be messy too. And in that shared humanness, connection deepens. You laugh more. You forgive faster. You feel safer, not because people are perfect, but because perfection is no longer the goal. There's grief in letting go of the ideal self, because it held your hopes, it carried your longing, it made you feel like if you just worked hard enough, you'd finally feel safe. So when you release it, there's sadness, there's confusion. Who am I without this image? What happens if I stop trying to become that version of me? What happens is freedom. Because the truth is, you were never meant to become the ideal. You were meant to be fully alive. And being alive means being in process, not finished, not flawless, just real. Forgiveness grows in that space. In the space where you no longer ask yourself to be anything other than human. In the space where you see clearly what you are and still choose to stay. This is not settling, it's softening. It's no longer turning your growth into a punishment. It's no longer making your self-worth depend on your performance. It's resting, even when things aren't fixed. It's Loving yourself while you, 39, still healing. That's the root of all forgiveness. You may still have moments where you try to perform, where you chase the old ideal. That's okay. You don't have to get it right all the time. Just notice, breathe, return. Every time you choose honesty over perfection, you deepen your healing. Every time you speak kindly to yourself in your imperfection, you break the old pattern. You're not here to be impressive. You're here to be free. You're not here to earn peace. You're here to live it. And that begins not when you become the person you always wanted to be, but when you finally accept the one you already are. Keep walking. The path is still unfolding. Even after you stop chasing the ideal self, the urge to hold on still lingers. It's subtle. You no longer expect perfection, but you might still carry blame. A quiet belief that the past could have been better if only you had done something differently. A lingering question: why did I act that way? Why didn't I know better? Why wasn't I stronger? Even when the judgment softens, memory can leave traces. And it's not always the memory itself that hurts. It's how permanent it feels, like something frozen in place, like something that can never be undone. But nothing stays fixed, not your mistakes, not your feelings, not even the version of you that made those choices. And the deeper truth that begins to rise here is Anica's principle of impermanence. Not as a concept, not as philosophy, but as lived experience. Everything changes, all of it, including the parts of you that still carry blame. You may not notice this right away. At first, you assume things are solid because they hurt the same way. Every time, the thought returns, the emotion repeats, and it feels like a pattern that's here to stay. But what mindfulness begins to reveal, and what soft self-honesty confirms this, that even the deepest pain moves, even regret shifts, even shame doesn't hold its shape forever. What keeps these feelings alive isn't their nature, it's your resistance. The way you rehearse them, the way you fear them, the way you try to make them mean something final. Anika reveals another way, not through avoidance, not through denial, but through presence, through simply noticing that everything in you is already changing, all the time. The breath flows in, then out. Thoughts arise, then fade. Emotions swell, then fall. This isn't weakness, it's the nature of all things. And the more deeply you see this, the more gently you begin to treat yourself. Because how can you blame something that's already moved on? Self-blame often feels permanent because we cling to the story. We repeat the details. We define ourselves by them. We assume the emotion we felt then is still the same now. But the truth is, the moment is gone. The you who acted, who froze, who didn't know what to do, that version no longer exists. They're a memory. They've been changing with every breath since. You are not the same person, even if the judgment tries to follow. What makes this hard to accept is that the mind wants certainty. It wants to hold something still, even if it hurts. It believes that by repeating the story, it's protecting you. But all it's doing is freezing your compassion. Anika melts that, gently, not forcefully. It invites you to sit with the pain without assuming it will last. To feel it, name it, breathe through it, then let it change, as it naturally does. You don't need to make the pain disappear. You only need to stop holding it as if it's the whole truth. When you start seeing every feeling as temporary, you create space. Space to feel without drowning. Space to forgive without forgetting. Space to allow yourself to move forward without needing the past. to vanish. This is not about detachment in a cold sense. It's about tenderness. It's about recognizing that every part of you, even the ones that hurt, is in motion. That includes your judgments. The thoughts you had about yourself 5 years ago aren't the same ones you have now. They've shifted. That means you're capable of change. And if you're capable of change, so is your relationship to your past. Anika also reveals that other people change. The ones you hurt, the ones who hurt you, nobody stays. Frozen. Everyone is reacting, adapting, evolving. And while that doesn't undo what was done, it reminds you that growth is possible on all sides, that healing isn't a solitary task. That time, when met with awareness, can soften even the sharpest wounds. There's a deep relief in understanding that impermanence is not something you have to force. It's happening already, whether you notice it or not, whether you try to speed it up or not. What mindfulness does is allow you to witness it, to stop resisting what's already in motion. That includes forgiveness. You don't have to push it, you just have to make room for it. Sometimes, the reason self-blame feels so heavy is because you're still holding on to the hope that you can change the past by feeling bad enough. But no amount of guilt can rewrite what's already happened. What it can do is keep you stuck. Impermanence breaks that illusion. It shows you that time only moves one way, and that the only power you have is now not in rewriting the past, but in meeting it differently, with more softness, more understanding. There is also freedom in knowing that even the pain of not being forgiven by others is temporary. If someone hasn't accepted your apology, if someone hasn't come back, that heartbreak hurts, but even that evolves. What feels like rejection today may feel like clarity in a year. What feels like unbearable grief now may become wisdom you carry forward. Impermanence doesn't mean you forget. It means you don't get stuck. The body shows this too. Emotions pass through it like weather. Tightness comes and goes. Breath rises and falls. The nervous system calms when you stop fighting the present moment. This is not bypassing. It's reality. It's the slow unraveling of all the moments you believed would define you forever. In this space, self-forgiveness becomes simpler. Not easier, but simpler. It becomes less about changing your whole self and more about recognizing that your whole self is always changing, that the version of you that holds blame is not the only version that exists, that you can feel regret without being consumed by it, that you can see your past with open eyes and still choose to care for yourself now. Anika also teaches you how to stop chasing final answers. The belief that you have to reach some perfect state of clarity before you can rest is just another form of control. But understanding that nothing lasts allows you to settle. Even uncertainty becomes something you can sit with. You stop needing to resolve every thought. You stop needing to be completely sure before you let go. You simply trust that things move, and that's enough. This shift brings peace, not because the past is gone, but because you're no longer letting it dictate your worth. You begin to see that every emotion is a wave, and no matter how big it feels, it doesn't stay. That alone is enough to start loosening your grip. There's beauty in this kind of forgiveness. It's not dramatic. It's not a moment of total erasure. It's slow, gentle, quiet. It's the repeated decision to not punish yourself today for who you were yesterday. It's remembering that the person you're being right now is different from the person you're blaming, and that difference matters. You don't need to force anything to go away. You only need to let it pass through. The feeling of failure, the weight of guilt, the fear that you're not enough. All of it moves, all of it changes shape, and the more you witness that, the less power it has. Even your patterns, the ones you think are part of who you are, those aren't permanent either. You might fall into the same reaction, the same coping, the same thought. But the moment you notice it, you interrupt the cycle, and that interruption is already change. Anicca doesn't promise that pain won't return. It simply shows you that when it does, you're not helpless. You've sat with it before. You've breathed through it. You've survived it. And you can meet it. Again, not with fear, but with patience, because you know it won't last. That kind of confidence changes everything. It turns old triggers into signals. It turns fear into information. It turns memory into presence. You don't need to prove anything anymore. You don't need to solve everything. You just need to stay. Forgiveness then becomes a relationship, not a one-time event, a continual meeting with yourself, where you notice what arises, you breathe with it, and you watch it pass. You do this not because it's easy, but because it's true, because truth always brings peace. Letting go of self-blame through impermanence doesn't mean you stop caring. It means you care from a place of compassion, not control. You show up for yourself, not because you're broken, but because you're human, and being human means changing, always. The past may still echo, but your response to it doesn't have to stay the same. That is your freedom. That is your path forward. Let the wave come. Let it speak. Let it go. And stay grounded in the one truth that holds everything gently. This, too, is passing. Keep walking. Keep breathing. The weight you carried is already shifting, and the next step is waiting for you. When you begin to feel the truth of impermanence, not just understand it, but live it, something inside you begins to loosen. You stop holding your past so tightly. You stop identifying with every thought. The patterns that once felt permanent begin to fade. The shame that once felt endless begins to soften. You no longer assume every regret needs to be solved. You just start being with what is, and that's what changes everything. But as the grip of self-blame weakens, something deeper begins to rise. A quiet ache, a longing you may not have known you were carrying, not for punishment, not for answers, but for reconciliation, not with others, with yourself. There's a part of you that wants to be spoken to, not explained away, not analyzed, but spoken to, directly. A part that needs to hear what no one ever said, what you've never fully said to yourself. An apology not out of guilt, but out of care. Not because you need to condemn yourself, but because you've started to understand yourself. This is where the healing becomes real. When regret turns into relationship, when memory meets presence, when pain becomes something you can honor, not to feed it, but to finally let it rest. In Buddhist traditions, repentance ceremonies are not built around shame. They're built around acknowledgement. The act of bowing, chanting, confessing, it's not punishment. It's release. A way to turn toward the truth with humility, clarity, and compassion. It's a recognition that no one escapes imperfection, that all of us cause harm, knowingly and unknowingly, that the human experience is shaped by forgetfulness, confusion, fear, and yet, through awareness and sincerity, we can begin again. That spirit is what you bring now, not into a temple, but into your own heart. You don't need robes or incense to create a space of healing. You only need your attention, your willingness, and your honesty. The ritual is not about performance. It's not about doing it right. It's about meeting yourself fully, without defense. You've spent years surviving, years trying to be better, more worthy, more whole. This moment is different. It's not about changing anything. It's about honoring what has been carried and offering it space to be seen, felt, and released. Start by choosing a quiet place, not because silence is required, but because this act deserves intention. Let this be a moment outside the noise of daily life, a space where you don't rush, where nothing needs to be accomplished. You are not here to fix yourself. You are here to speak from the heart. Begin by sitting, not with perfect posture, just with presence. Let your body settle. Feel your breath. Let yourself arrive. You can begin the ritual with a simple phrase, "I am here now." That sentence may seem small, but it carries everything. It means you've stopped running, you've stopped avoiding, you've come back to witness what's been waiting. From here, you gently turn your attention inward, toward the moments you regret, the ways you've hurt yourself, the times you abandoned your needs, ignored your limits, spoke with cruelty, stayed silent when you needed to speak, said yes when you meant no, punished your own softness, betrayed your own trust. These aren't failures, they are symptoms of pain, but pain still needs to be met. As each memory rises, name it gently, not to relive it, not to shame yourself, but to bring it into the light. This is the part most of us skip. We rush to forgiveness without fully seeing what we're forgiving. But acknowledgement is sacred. Without it, the wound remains hidden. You don't need to justify what happened. You don't need to explain your choices. Just speak the truth. This happened. I did this. I avoided this. I believed this. Speak it softly, as if speaking to a friend. Because now you are. Once the naming is done, you shift. You place your hand on your heart, simply focus your breath. Thereand you begin the apology. This is not an apology meant to break you down. It's one that lifts you up. You are not apologizing because you are bad. You are apologizing because you are finally being honest. And honesty is love. Say to yourself, "I'm sorry for the ways I abandoned you. I'm sorry for the pressure I placed on you. I'm sorry I didn't listen when you needed rest. I'm sorry for the times I told you to toughen up, to stay quiet, to be smaller. I'm sorry for treating your pain like it didn't matter. I'm sorry for all the times I expected you to be perfect. I didn't know better. I was trying to survive. But now I see you, and I'm not leaving." You can repeat these or create your own words. Let them come from where the pain lives. Let them be shaped by your actual experience. This isn't about getting it right. It's about being sincere. You're not talking to an idea. You're talking to the parts of yourself that lived through everything without the care they needed. And now you are offering that care. Let the words be slow. Let emotion rise. You don't need to hold it back. You don't need to stay composed. If tears come, they are part of the ritual. If silence comes, it is part of the ritual. Nothing needs to be pushed away. You are not performing healing. You are embodying it. After the apology, take a moment to breathe. Stay connected to your heart. Feel what it's like to speak this way to yourself. You may feel grief, relief, numbness. All of it belongs. There's no correct reaction. There is only presence, and presence is enough. From here, offer yourself a vow. Not a promise of perfection, a commitment to stay, a gentle intention. You might say, "I will speak more kindly. I will rest when I need rest. I will listen when my heart feels tight. I will treat myself with the same compassion I offer others. I may forget. I may fall back into old patterns, but I will return again and again. These words matter because they mark a shift. They say the past is seen, honored, released, not erased but transformed. It becomes soil now for something new to grow. To close the ritual, you can bow if it feels right. You can place both hands on your heart, or simply whisper, "Thank you. Thank you for surviving. Thank you for staying. Thank you for being here now." These words are not empty. They land deeply because you've earned them, not through achievement, through courage, through honesty, through the quiet strength of turning inward. This ritual is not something you do once. It can be returned to each time you feel the weight of old regret. Each time the harsh voice rises, each time you feel disconnected, you return. You speak. You stay. That's the practice. That's the path. And over time, something changes. The guilt no longer dominates. The shame no longer defines. You begin to trust yourself again. Not because you're flawless, but because you've become a safe place to land. This is the heart of repentance in Buddhist tradition. Not begging for forgiveness from outside, but returning to truth within. Not punishment, but purification through presence. You bow not because you are low, but because bowing brings humility. And humility is where the heart softens. You may still feel echoes of self-judgment. That's okay. You're not trying to erase anything. You're learning how to hold it. You're learning how to care for it. The ritual becomes a reminder that you are worth returning to, that your pain matters, that your healing is sacred, not in a dramatic way, but in the quiet, ordinary act of coming home to yourself. So whenever you feel disconnected or heavy with the past, remember this: you don't need permission to forgive yourself. You don't need approval. You don't need to wait until you're better. You are allowed to start now, by acknowledging, by speaking, by staying. And when you do, something in you will finally hear what it's been waiting for. Not that you're sorry because you're broken, but that you're sorry because you care, because you're ready to take responsibility with love, not shame. And that love is what repairs what was never supposed to stay broken. You're not trying to become someone new. You're learning how to return to who you were before self-rejection taught you to leave yourself behind. This is not the end. This is the beginning of relationship with the only person you'll never live without. Keep walking. You're already closer than you think. After speaking the words you needed to hear, after offering yourself an apology rooted in sincerity rather than shame, something quiet begins to settle. Not because all the pain is gone, but because the distance between you and your own heart has begun to close. You no longer feel like a stranger to yourself. You've touched something real: honesty without violence, responsibility without guilt. But even after the ritual, even after release, there are patterns that linger. Not because you, 39, redoing something wrong, but because the mind is used to circling back. Even when you, 39, soften toward yourself, even when you've begun to repair trust, the pull towards self-loathing can return like a reflex. Not all wounds leave loudly. Some become habits. This is where the inner cycle becomes visible. The repetition of thought, the loop of emotion, the return to judgment even after clarity. In Buddhist teaching, samsara is the cycle of birth and death, of craving and clinging, of ignorance and suffering. But samsara isn't 39, just external. It 39. Not just something you escape after lifetimes of spiritual work. Samsara lives in the mind, in your emotional habits, in the way you return to the same self-defeating thoughts even after learning better. The same blame, the same fear, the same internal punishment that repeats, not because it's true, but because it's familiar. These loops can be subtle. You begin with a neutral feeling, then a thought arises that whispers, quote, "You should have done more," quote, or, quote, "You always mess things up," quote. That thought triggers tension, maybe a drop in the chest or a tightening in the throat. The body remembers the old story. You go quiet, withdraw, disconnect. Then the self-talk begins again, quote, "Why am I like this?" quote. Now shame arrives, wrapped in a false sense of clarity. But it's not clarity, it's the same loop, a samsaric spin in the mind that creates the illusion of truth simply because it, 39, repeated. What makes these cycles powerful is not their content but their speed. They happen quickly, often beneath your full awareness. And so they create suffering, not because they are accurate, but because they go unexamined. The longer they go unnoticed, the deeper the groove becomes in the mind. This is the personal samsarathi inner wheel of thought, emotion, reaction that traps you in old identities. Even if your external life changes, the internal loop keeps you stuck. Breaking the loop doesn't start with fighting the thoughts. It begins with presence, with slowing down, enough to notice what's happening as it's happening. This is not passive. It's the most powerful interruption you can offer. You don't have to force yourself to think positively. You don't have to pretend to love yourself in moments when you don't. You only need to see, to say inwardly, "This is a loop." That seeing creates space, and in that space, the cycle weakens. Most people believe they have to change the content of their thoughts to heal, but transformation happens when you change your relationship to the thoughts, when you stop believing that every judgment is a fact, when you stop following every mental narrative like it's a map. Samsara within thrives on identification, on the belief that if the mind says you're unworthy, it must be true. Mindfulness disrupts that by creating just enough distance to say, "This is what I'm thinking, this is what I'm feeling." And that gap is where freedom begins. One common pattern in the inner samsara is the belief that self-loathing is useful, that being hard on yourself will make you better, that if you feel bad enough, you, 39, stop making mistakes. But pain does not always teach wisdom. More often, it just teaches fear. Self-loathing creates a false sense of control. You feel powerless about the past, so you punish yourself now to feel like you, 39, redoing something. But that's not justice. That's repetition. The loop becomes even stronger when it disguises itself as insight. You reflect on a past choice and say, "I finally see how terrible I was." But true insight doesn't create paralysis, it creates movement. If your realization leads to more self-hate, it's not insight, it's the loop playing a new tune. Real understanding opens the heart, it doesn't close it. Another trap in the cycle is performance. You might feel good for a while, then make a small mistake, and immediately the thought returns. You're back to square one. As if healing has to be linear, as if progress is invalidated by imperfection. But that's the samsara, again making one moment define your entire path. Making a single breath of discomfort erase months of care. The loop doesn't respect truth. It only knows how to repeat. That's why you can't argue with it. You have to step out of it. Presence interrupts the pattern without aggression. You don't shame yourself for having the thought. You don't panic when the emotion comes back. You meet it like a traveler who's been here before. You say, I know this path. I've walked it. I can choose differently now. That choice might be small. Taking a proplokes breath, naming the pattern, putting a hand on your chest, sitting still instead of reacting. These seem like small things, but inside the samsaric cycle, they're revolutionary. Understanding that samsara exists internally also shifts how you see your past. The younger version of you who made that choice, who hurt someone, who froze or acted impulsively, maybe they weren't evil. Maybe they were caught in their own cycle, their own confusion, their own fear. The loop was playing, and they didn't yet know how to stop it. Recognizing that softens the judgment. It turns punishment into understanding, not as an excuse, but as truth. Even your survival mechanisms can be part of the loop. The ways you detach, numb out, over-explain, keep people at a distance. These are reactions to old patterns of harm. They once served a purpose. But when they become automatic, they keep you in the same emotional orbit. Not because you're weak, but because the mind repeats what it knows. Samsara is not sustained by your failures, it's sustained by habit. To step out of it, you don't need to be perfect. You just need to be awake. Awake enough to say, this is familiar, but I don't have to follow it. Awake enough to feel discomfort without letting it decide your worth. Awake enough to pause long enough for a new thought, a new response, a new pattern to emerge. Sometimes that pause feels like nothing. You'll want it to be louder, more dramatic. But change is often quiet, a split-second decision not to spiral, a moment of kindness in the middle of the old voice rising, a refusal to rehearse the same blame. These moments build a new rhythm, not by destroying the old one, but by not feeding it. It's also important to know that the loop might return. That doesn't mean you've failed. Samsara isn't something you escape once. It's something you learn to see over and over. Every time you notice it, you've already disrupted it. Awareness itself is an exit. You don't need to be in constant battle with your mind. You just need to remain curious, to keep choosing presence over panic, clarity over repetition, softness over shame. Breaking the cycle isn't a single decision. It's a series of choices you make each day, sometimes each hour, sometimes each breath. You might still feel the pull, but you won't be owned by it. You'll know what it is. You'll see it, name it, and stay present long enough for it to pass. And when it does pass, something quiet will arrive in its place. Not perfection, not resolution, just space. And in that space, something new can grow. A thought that's kinder, a feeling that's softer, a story that doesn't trap you in the same ending. Samsara within isn't a flaw, it's a part of the human condition, a loop that plays until it's interrupted. Not by force, by awareness, by presence, by returning again and again to the truth that you are not your thoughts, not your habits, not your past. You are the one who notices, the one who chooses, the one who breathes and stays. Keep walking. Each step is already something new. Each time you name the cycle and choose not to follow it. Each time you pause instead of turning on yourself. Each time you respond with awareness instead of instinct. Something in you begins to change. Not suddenly, not with grand gestures, but with steady, quiet acts of presence. You've begun to interrupt the samsara within, not by fighting it, but by seeing it. And that seeing is enough to begin, But now the path leads somewhere deeper. Awareness creates space, but something else must enter that space for real transformation to take root. Not correction, not more self-improvement. What's needed now is compassion, real, boundless, committed compassion, not only for others, but for yourself. This is where the heart of the Bodhisattva teaching opens in a way many forget. The Bodhisattva, the being who vows to remain in the world until all beings are free, is not just a symbol of spiritual idealism. It is a living path, a choice made again and again to meet suffering with kindness. But the part that often gets left out is this: the Bodhisattva does not exclude themselves from that compassion. They don't offer love outward and abandon themselves inward. They do not leave their own suffering unattended while caring for the pain of others. That would be imbalance, not liberation. And yet this is what so many spiritual seekers do. They turn their energy toward helping others, but continue to speak harshly to themselves. They offer presence, care, understanding to friends, partners, strangers, but meet their own discomfort with criticism. They uplift others with wisdom and patience, but silence their own pain with judgment. Somewhere along the way, the idea formed that compassion for the self is indulgent, that it gets in the way of the real work. But this is a misunderstanding of the real work path. If you exclude yourself from compassion, your service becomes a performance. It cannot be sustained. It is not complete. The Bodhisattva's vow is rooted in interconnectedness. There is no separation between the one who serves and the one who suffers. If you do not include yourself in the circle of care, the circle is broken. Self-compassion is not a distraction from spiritual growth. It is the foundation of it. Without it, all effort becomes imbalance. Without it, wisdom turns cold. Without it, the very heart of the path is missing. Applying this compassion inward begins with recognizing how much you still carry. Not just pain, but the belief that your pain doesn't matter, that others deserve healing, but you must earn it, that everyone else's struggle is worthy of care, but yours is a problem to be fixed or hidden. These beliefs are not humility. They are internalized neglect, and they keep you cut off from the full truth of compassion. The Bodhisattva does not sort suffering into categories. They don't prioritize some forms over others. They meet it all, equally, without hesitation. You must learn to do the same with your own. When sadness arises, meet it. When regret surfaces, hold it. When fear speaks, listen, without analysis, without immediate solutions, just presence, just care. This is not passivity. This is profound courage. To stay with your own discomfort, not to fix it, but to love it. To sit with the parts of yourself you've always rushed past. So often, the most compassionate people are the ones who have learned to survive by taking care of others. They become protectors, caretakers, guides. But beneath that strength is often a silence, an unspoken exhaustion, a deep weariness that comes from always giving and never receiving, even from themselves. But a bodhisattva is not a martyr. They are not drained by their service, because their compassion flows in all directions, including inward. This is the shift that must happen now, to stop placing your worth in your usefulness, to stop believing your value is measured by how little you need, to stop using compassion as something to earn approval. It is not currency, it is nature, and it must begin with how you speak to yourself, how you care for your pleen's own experience, how you hold space for your own process, not as a separate task, but as the same work. Compassion for the self is not about excusing behavior or avoiding responsibility. It is about holding space for your full humanity while still moving with integrity. When you make a mistake, you acknowledge it without cruelty. When you fall into fear, you don't belittle yourself. When you feel lost, you don't rush to fix it. You stay, you listen, you offer the same presence you would give a suffering child, a frightened friend, a grieving stranger. No less, no different. This kind of compassion transforms everything. It begins to shift how you recover from pain. You stop spiraling into shame. You stop making every hard moment into a personal failure. Instead, you see pain as a natural part of the path. You meet it with breath, with stillness, with care. The same way a bodhisattva would approach another's heartbreak, you begin to approach your own. To live this way requires practice. It doesn't happen just because you understand it. You must remind yourself daily, I am not outside the circle of care. I am not the exception. I am not the one person who doesn't deserve softness. And you must act in alignment with that truth. Not just think it. Speak kindly. Rest fully. Stop apologizing for your needs. Set boundaries that honor your nervous system. These are not luxuries. They are devotion. Even when you feel unworthy, especially then, return to the practice. Compassion is not a reward. It is a response. You are not offering it because you've earned it. You are offering it because suffering is here, and suffering, wherever it arises, is always worthy of care. You may still struggle with this. Old voices may rise. Patterns may pull you back. That's okay. Return. Again. Compassion is not measured by consistency. It is measured by willingness, by your commitment to keep coming back, even after forgetting. That's what makes it real. Not perfection, presence. You may also notice that the more you include yourself in compassion, the more naturally it flows to others. It becomes less about effort, more about resonance. When you soften toward yourself, you stop projecting blame, you stop resenting others for needing you, you stop keeping score. You become a clear channel, not because you're always calm, but because you're always honest. And as this inward compassion deepens, your understanding of love expands. It's no longer about fixing, no longer about rescuing. It becomes about being with what is, about staying close, whether it's your own pain or another's, whether it's a wave of grief or a moment of joy. You stop needing things to change in order to open your heart. You open it because that's who you are now, a person who has learned not to leave themselves behind. This is the path of the Bodhisattva, no distant, not abstract, but lived, in the way you breathe through your tension, in the way you speak to yourself when no one is watching, in the way you refuse to abandon yourself just because the world taught you that you don't matter. You do. Your suffering does. And so does your healing. You are not being asked to prove your goodness through self-denial. You are being asked to remember your wholeness through self-kindness, to include yourself not at the end of your list, but at the beginning. Not because your pain is worse, not because it is special, but because it is here, and that is always enough. You don't need to justify your care. You don't need to explain your needs. You only need to meet them, again and again, with the same unconditional presence you would offer anyone else. The Bodhisattva does not pause to assess whether someone is worthy of compassion. They offer it because that is the nature of awakening. You are that someone, right now, right here. And when you live this way, not just knowing, but practicing, everything shifts. Not all at once, but steadily. You begin to feel safe in your own presence. You begin to trust your own heart. You begin to experience compassion not as something to achieve, but as something that's always been waiting inside. You, ready to be turned inward. So return to yourself now, not with answers, not with solutions, just with care, with attention, with the quiet strength of someone who knows that their healing is not a distraction from the path, it is the path. Keep walking. You, 39, not alone anymore. You, 39, not forgotten. You, 39, not outside the circle. You are home. When you stop holding yourself outside the circle of compassion, when you begin to turn toward your own suffering with the same care, you, 39, always extended to others, something tender begins to emerge. You no longer relate to pain as something shameful or unworthy of attention. You stop trying to earn relief. You begin to understand that your present steady, sincere, and non-judging is enough. But even with that knowing, even with the deepest self-acceptance, resistance still lives in the body. It shows up without warning, in hesitation, in tightness, in the sudden urge to avoid, to distract, to numb. Compassion has opened the door, but what helps you stay in the room is the breath. Breath is the first truth. It arrives before thought. It leaves before words. It is the anchor beneath every wave, the thread that connects awareness to embodiment. When the mind wants to run, when the heart feels overwhelmed, the breath stays. This is why the Buddha placed so much weight on it, not as an idea, but as a path. Anapanasati mindfulness of breathing is not about technique alone, it is about relationship. Breath is not just something you observe, it is something you befriend. It becomes the bridge between your reactive mind and your deeper knowing. You may already know how to notice the breath, but noticing is only the beginning. What softens resistance is learning to stay with it, to not treat the breath like a background rhythm, but as a companion. When you meet tension with breath, you are not pushing it away. You are embracing it. You are saying, without words, I will not fight you. I will not fix you. I will sit with you and breathe. This shifts everything, because most inner resistance isn't caused by the pain itself, but by the belief that you must reject it, that you must remove it to feel safe. The breath teaches you another way. It says, this tension can be here. This tightness can stay. I don't need to destroy it. I only need to breathe with it. And in that breathing, something softens not because you forced it to, but because you stopped resisting it. Anapanasati begins with awareness. You turn attention to the breath, not to change it, but to meet it. At first, it may feel mechanical, but as presence deepens, breath becomes texture. You start to feel the difference between shallow and deep, tight and open. You start to see how emotion affects rhythm. Anxiety shortens the inhale, sadness slows the exhale, guilt holds the breath entirely. This is not a bees problem, it's insight. The breath becomes your mirror, not judging, only reflecting. When you begin to breathe mindfully in difficult moments, you, 39, not using breath as a trick to feel better. You, 39, reusing it to feel more honestly. The breath becomes a way to stay, to remain connected when your habits tell you to leave. This is especially important in the moments where old patterns try to resurface. The voice of shame, the reflex to judge, the urge to collapse all of it can be softened, not by argument, but by staying with the breath. Every breath is an opportunity to interrupt the cycle of self-rejection. Each inhale becomes a chance to return. Each exhale, a way to release the tension you didn't know you were holding. This isn't poetic, it's physiological. The breath directly impacts your nervous system. It speaks to the parts of you that don't respond to logic. Slow, conscious breathing signals safety to the body, and a body that feels safe is more willing to let go. It is also a form of reclaiming. So many of us grow up disconnecting from our bodies. We learn to override signals, ignore exhaustion, suppress emotion. But the breath cannot be separated. It lives in the body, and through it, you learn to return, to feel again, to trust sensation, to let the body speak. When you breathe mindfully, you're not only calming the mind, you're allowing your body to remember that it belongs, that it is not the enemy. The simplicity of Anapanasati is its strength. You don't need to analyze. You don't need to plan. You only need to be present with what is happening as it unfolds. And yet this simplicity reveals layers. As breath, awareness deepens, you begin to notice space between thoughts. You begin to feel emotion without collapsing into it. You begin to sense that behind every wave of experience, there is something, still something that doesn't need fixing, only witnessing. This stillness is not distant, it's intimate. It's not the absence of life, but the fullness of presence. And it arises naturally, not through control, but through consistency. Breath by breath, you become more able to stay grounded, to meet yourself with equanimity, even when the surface is messy. This is the quiet power of Anapanasati. It teaches resilience through softness, stability through surrender. Over time, you start to trust the breath more than the mind. Not because thinking is wrong, but because the breath doesn't lie. It doesn't spin stories. It doesn't exaggerate. It simply shows what is. You begin to turn to it in moments of fear, of regret, of confusion, not as escape, but as truth. The breath becomes your teacher, and its lesson is always this: stay here. This doesn't mean the breath fixes everything. It doesn't erase pain, but it does keep you connected. And connection changes the nature of the pain. Pain that is met with breath doesn't fester. It doesn't become shame. It becomes sensation. It becomes something you can hold, something you can breathe through. In the deeper stages of Anapanasati, breath leads to insight. You begin to observe not just breath and body, but the impermanent nature of everything. You start to see how thoughts arise and pass like wind, how moods shift, how nothing stays solid. This brings calm, not because life becomes predictable, but because you no longer need it to be. You have breath. You can stay. There's also a quiet intimacy that grows from this practice. You begin to enjoy being with yourself, not in a performative way. Not because you're achieving anything, but because presence becomes pleasant. It becomes enough. This is a powerful shift, because so much of self-rejection is rooted in avoidance. But when you enjoy your own presence, when you find peace in the simplicity of breath, the need to escape begins to dissolve. And when resistance rises again, and you meet it as a friend, you say, "I see you," and you breathe. You don't demand that it leave. You don't pretend you're not uncomfortable. You stay. And in that staying, you begin to change the relationship. Resistance softens when it is met without violence. Eventually, the breath becomes more than a practice. It becomes your companion in every moment. Not something separate, not something you do, something you are with. You breathe through conversations, through doubt, through fear, through beauty, through silence. The breath becomes your rhythm, your compass, your anchor. And in this way, Anapanasati becomes a way of life, not a tool for crisis, a path for presence, a way to live without turning against yourself, a way to remain kind in the face of difficulty, a way to move slowly through the complexity of being human without shutting down. You do not need to breathe in any special way. You do not need to master technique. The breath is already doing its work. Your only job is to be with it, to keep returning, to stay when it's easier to run, to soften when the old habits want to harden, and when you forget which will you begin again. One breath, then another. This is not escape. This is embodiment. You are not leaving life behind. You are entering it more fully. Breath by breath, you are returning to the body you left behind, to the feelings you suppressed, to the presence that was always waiting for you. This is the quiet power that heals not through force, but through rhythm. So return now to this moment, to this breath. Let it be enough. Let it hold what words can't. Let it teach you how to stay, how to soften, how to forgive. The mind may resist, the body may tense. That's okay. Breathe anyway. Keep walking. You're already where you need to be. The breath has become your companion now, not a trick to control what you feel, but a steady presence that helps you meet what's already here. You've started to learn that healing doesn't need to be loud, that gentleness can go deeper than force, that what softens the heart is often not effort but permission. And yet, even in that softness, a question may rise beneath the surface. How do I move forward without slipping back into pressure? How do I stay committed without being hard on myself? How do I grow without turning that growth into another impossible standard? This is where right effort, one of the most often misunderstood teachings of the Buddha, begins to unfold with new meaning. When people first encounter the idea of effort in spiritual practice, they often translate it into striving, into trying harder, into fixing what feels broken. There's an unconscious belief that if you're not improving yourself at all times, you're falling behind. That effort should feel like tension, that discipline is about restriction. But this is not the teaching, this is conditioning. And it, 39, the kind that exhausts people on the very path that's meant to bring relief. Right effort is not harsh, it is not frantic, it is not built on the belief that you are flawed and must become something else. It's not the same as ambition, it's not spiritual hustle. The Buddha wasn't asking people to fight their way to freedom. He was offering a path that honors balance, wisdom, and compassion. Right effort is about energy, but energy that is applied with clarity. It's not about more eats, about aligned. It's not about forcing the mind into silence or dragging yourself into perfect behavior. It's about gently guiding your attention, your speech, your actions, again and again, toward what is skillful, helpful, kind. In practice, this means effort doesn't begin from a place of fear. It begins from care, the desire to suffer less, the intention to meet each moment with a little more awareness. And sometimes that effort looks quiet. It looks like choosing to return to your breath instead of continuing a spiral of self-judgment. It looks like walking away from an argument rather than proving your point. It looks like not meditating today because you're exhausted and rest is the wiser choice. That is also effort, the right kind. One of the reasons people resist this teaching is because they're used to effort being painful. They've been taught that to grow you must push, that to be worthy you must achieve. And so they bring this energy into their practice. They sit with rigid backs and clenched jaws, trying to conquer their thoughts. They turn their journal into a record of shortcomings. They meditate with the hope of becoming better, purer, more enlightened. And when they don't feel progress, they assume they're failing. But right effort is not fueled by punishment. It doesn't yell, it doesn't shame, it whispers, it invites, it guides you back to the middle. When you're too passive, it helps you engage. When you're forcing, it helps you soften. It's not a fixed pace, it's a responsive movement, one that listens, adapts, adjusts. This responsiveness is rooted in awareness. You cannot know what right effort looks like for you in a given moment unless you're connected to your experience. That's why mindfulness is so essential, not because it gives you control, but because it gives you perspective. You start to notice when you're being pulled by old perfectionist habits. You start to feel when your motivation is fear dressed up as discipline. And when you see clearly, you have a choice. Right effort is also not about becoming productive. It is not concerned with how many things you check off your spiritual to-do list. It is not about sitting longer than others, memorizing more teachings, having more insight. It's not about progress in the way the world defines it. Sometimes the most important effort is saying no, saying not now, saying I need to slow down. This is where gentleness becomes a form of strength. Choosing softness in a culture that values pressure is radical. Letting go of spiritual perfectionism is courageous, not because it's easier, but because it asks you to trust a different kind of wisdom, one that doesn't measure your value by how well you're performing, but by how honestly you're showing up. The Buddha spoke of 4 aspects of right effort: to prevent unwholesome states from arising, to abandon unwholesome states already present, to cultivate wholesome states, and to maintain those wholesome states once they arise. But these are not commands, they're descriptions of the flow of practice. Not every moment is about building. Some moments are about letting go, some are about resting in what's already here. In your own life, this might look like noticing a judgmental thought before it gains momentum and choosing not to feed it. That's effort. It might look like pausing in the middle of a shame spiral, placing a hand on your chest, and reminding yourself that this too will pass. That's effort. It might look like sitting in stillness, not to achieve anything, but simply to return to presence. That's effort. And when you can't do any of that, when your mind is loud and your body is tired and everything feels too heavy, that's not failure. That's a moment to adjust, to offer yourself the effort of not pushing, to step back, to breathe, to remind yourself that effort is not always visible. Sometimes it's the choice not to give up entirely. That, too, is right effort. This also means that your path will look different from others. What requires effort for you may be ease for someone else. What's healing for you may not be what others need. Right effort is not about comparison. It's about alignment. It asks only that you be honest with yourself, that you notice what supports your freedom and what pulls you deeper into suffering, and then, with gentleness, shift in the direction of what supports. You'll know the effort is right, not because it makes you feel better instantly, but because it creates space. It creates steadiness. It opens something inside you rather than closing it down. Even if the moment is hard, even if emotion is present, right effort feels clear. It may be uncomfortable, but it won't feel cruel. That's the difference. You may still hear the voice that says you should be doing more. That you, 39, lazy, that you're falling behind. Let that voice come. And then listen for the deeper one, the one that says, stay steady, stay close, keep practicing, not perfectly, just honestly. Over time, you begin to see that discipline doesn't mean self-denial. It doesn't mean pushing through at any cost. It means staying connected to what matters, again and again, even when it, 39, inconvenient. Even when it, 39, small. It means returning to the path, not because you fear what happens if you don't, but because you care enough to continue. This shift is what makes effort sustainable, because when it, 39, rooted in care, it doesn't, 39, burn you out. It doesn't ask you to become someone else. It simply supports who you already are at your most awake. You stop needing to prove your devotion. You just live it. In the way you speak, the way you rest, the way you show up for yourself. This is not a lesser form of discipline. It's deeper, it's truer. It's the kind of effort that doesn't just build habits, but builds trust. You begin to trust your own timing, your own rhythm, your own capacity to return, even after forgetting. That trust becomes the fuel, and it lasts longer than fear ever could. So right effort is not about pushing harder, it's about listening better, about adjusting with compassion, about staying close to the truth of your experience and making choices that align with clarity, not pressure, with care, not performance. The path doesn't ask you to be perfect, it asks you to be present, to keep moving with intention, even when it's slow, to return when you've wandered, to soften when you've hardened, to keep choosing the next step that honors your deepest freedom, not the loudest voice in your head. You're already practicing right effort each time you pause before reacting, each time you breathe instead of judge, each time you forgive yourself for being human and begin again. So keep walking, not faster, not harder, just steady, just honest. That is more than enough. When you stop confusing effort with punishment, when you begin to sense the rhythm of your own path and allow discipline to grow from care rather than pressure, your energy begins to feel different. You no longer move from the fear of not being enough. You move from something steadier, something rooted in love. That love becomes your ground, and from that ground, a new possibility opens. Not just the willingness to be present with yourself, but the ability to see yourself differently altogether, not as someone to fix, not as a project to complete, but as someone inherently sacred, a being not defined by wounds, but capable of holding them with grace. This is not fantasy. This is a deeper truth waiting to be remembered. You may not feel this yet. That's okay. Years of self-doubt don't fall away overnight, but the teachings of Buddhism don't just guide us to let go. They also guide us to see clearly what's already here. And one of the clearest teachings is this: your nature is not broken, your essence is not shame. Beneath confusion and conditioning and fear is a heart that was never unworthy, even when you forgot it was there. The Sutra of the Lotus Heart is not a text you can find in a book. It is a vision you bring to life within yourself, a way of seeing, a way of remembering, a way of sitting with your own existence and allowing it to be held as something holy. This practice begins with intention, not to become perfect, but to witness your own wholeness without turning away. In daily life, most of your focus is outward. You look at what's unfinished, what's wrong, what needs to be managed. When that habit turns inward, it becomes self-criticism. You view yourself the same way through what's missing, what's flawed, what still needs improvement. But the lotus heart does not grow from judgment, it grows from recognition. It opens when you stop trying to earn worth and start being present with the worth that was never lost. Visualization is not about escaping reality, it is a way to return to it more fully. When you bring an image into your mind that holds deep meaning, when you allow that image to fill your attention, it begins to shift the way you see yourself, not by force, but through resonance. The lotus in Buddhist symbolism is not just a flower, it is a truth. That even in muddy water, beauty can rise. That even in confusion, clarity exists. That your life, exactly as it is the ground for awakening. Begin by finding stillness. Let the breath settle. Let the body soften. You don't need to be calm. You only need to be honest. Let yourself arrive in whatever condition you're in. From this space, gently invite the image of the lotus, not as something outside of you, but within, not high above you, but at the center of your being. Place it where your heart beats, not the heart that pumps blood, but the one that feels everything. Let the lotus begin there. Visualize it slowly. A closed bud at first, quiet, subtle, not dramatic. And with each breath, allow it to open, not all at once, just one petal at a time. Let each petal represent something you've survived. A moment of courage, a time you showed up, a choice to stay when it would have been easier to leave. Let each petal hold a part of your story, not the polished parts, but the real ones. As the lotus opens, see how it holds everything, the beauty and the mess, the fear and the strength, the doubt and the devotion. Let it contain you, all of you. This is not about erasing your flaws, it is about including them in something larger, something spacious. Let the lotus become the shape of your own compassion, a place within you where nothing is rejected, nothing is outside the field of love. Now, begin to speak to this heart, not with words of fixing, with words of reverence. Let them come. Slowly, you can say, "This heart has carried so much. This heart has known silence and longing. This heart has broken and kept beating. This heart is worthy not someday, not after healing, but now." Speak to yourself not as a person trying to get it right, but as a being already full of light, already made of it. This visualization is not a one-time event. It is a practice. It reshapes the way you relate to your own existence. Each time you return to it, you are teaching your nervous system something different. You are saying, "I no longer accept the story that I am not enough. I no longer live inside the belief that I must become someone else to be whole." This image of the lotus is not decoration, it is medicine, and your mind, over time, will begin to believe what you repeatedly offer it. Let the image of the lotus heart extend into the way you walk through your life. When you feel unworthy, return to the petals. When you feel ashamed, remember their strength. When the world feels too loud, find that quiet center again. Not to escape, but to reorient, to return to what is true beneath the noise. This practice also shifts how you hold your past. Instead of seeing a series of wrong turns, you begin to see the unfolding. The way difficulty shaped your tenderness, the way loss taught you how to hold joy, the way your pain became the soil where presence could take root, not because suffering is noble, but because nothing was wasted, everything was used. You begin to see that awakening is not a destination, It is not something far from reach. It is already in motion. The moment you turn toward your own life with sincerity, you are already in practice. The moment you meet yourself with honesty, you are already aligning with the path. The lotus heart is not something you earn. It is something you uncover. This visualization becomes even more powerful when paired with action. The way you speak to yourself changes. You stop using shame as motivation. You stop waiting to be perfect before allowing joy. You start offering kindness, even when the old story says you don't deserve it. This is how the image becomes reality, not through control but through integration. Your body remembers these images. The nervous system does not differentiate between imagined care and real care when the intention is sincere. So each time you return to the lotus, each time you visualize that sacred space within, you are giving your body permission to rest. You are giving your heart permission to open. You are giving your mind permission to soften its grip. And with time, you may not need the image as much, because the qualities it represents, presence, compassion, reverence, will begin to live in you directly. You won't have to try to believe you are worthy. You will know it, not as a thought, but as a felt experience, as something you carry with you, silently, everywhere. This shift is not about becoming a new person. It's about seeing the one you already are more clearly. It's about recognizing that awakening isn't reserved for those who have it all figured out. It's for those who show up again and again with their whole heart, who fall and rise, who get lost and return, who choose love over and over, even when they don't know how it will be received. So begin this practice, not because you need to prove anything. Begin it because you are ready to see yourself through a clearer lens, one that doesn't filter everything through judgment, one that sees complexity and responds with care, one that treats your life not as an accident, but as something sacred. Return to the breath, return to the heart, return to the lotus, opening with quiet strength. Let that be your symbol. Let that be your mirror. Let it remind you that even now, even here, you are not far from awakening. You are already within it. Keep going. Let your life be the sutra. Let your heart write it, one breath at a time. As the image of the lotus heart begins to settle within you, something deeper begins to unfold. A new way of seeing. A new way of relating to yourself that doesn't depend on becoming perfect, but on recognizing your inherent capacity for awakening. You're no longer clinging to some future version of yourself to feel worthy. You're learning to honor who you are in this moment, messy, complex, still healing, but sacred all the same. Still, even with this shift in perception, there can be questions lingering beneath the surface. If you're worthy now, even with all that's happened, how do you make peace with the parts of your story that still feel confusing? How do you come to terms with the choices that caused harm or the patterns you didn't know how to break at the time? This is where the lens of dependent origination, or pathtika samuppada, becomes a tool not just for insight, but for forgiveness. Often we carry pain about our past without fully understanding what led us there. We say things like, "I should have known better," "I don't understand why I acted that way," or, "If I were truly good, I wouldn't have done that." These thoughts become walls. They block the flow of compassion. But Buddhist wisdom offers a different perspective. It doesn't look at your past through the lens of moral judgment. It looks at it through the lens of causality, not blame causes and conditions. According to the Buddha, nothing arises without a cause. Every thought, every reaction, Every decision emerges from a chain of conditions that came before it. The 12 links of dependent origination are not abstract philosophy. They are a map of how suffering arises and how it can be understood. They show us that we are never acting in isolation. We are shaped by contact, perception, feelings, reactions, and habits built over time. When we see this clearly, we stop asking, "What's wrong with me?" and begin asking, "What contributed to this?" That shift is where forgiveness starts. The first link is ignorance, no stupidity, but unawareness, a lack of clear seeing. This isn't a personal flaw. It's the starting point of all human confusion. You couldn't respond with wisdom in a moment. When wisdom wasn't yet available to you, maybe you didn't have the tools, maybe you didn't know what you were feeling. Maybe your view was limited by trauma, fear, or conditioning. Understanding this doesn't mean avoiding responsibility. It means recognizing that the seeds of your behavior were planted long before the moment you acted. From ignorance arises formations, habitual tendencies shaped by past experiences. These are the mental and emotional patterns that drive you without conscious thought. For example, you may have reacted with anger in a situation not because you are an angry person, but because anger was the conditioned response your system learned to survive. If you were never taught how to pause, how to self-soothe, or how to name your feelings, then the reaction wasn't chosen, it was automatic. That's not an excuse, that's a cause. These formations give rise to consciousness the moment awareness enters the picture. But this awareness is still colored by what came before. It's like waking up inside a movie that's already playing. You don't start with a blank slate. You begin with the influences already in motion. That awareness comes into contact with name and form your physical body, emotions, identity, and everything that makes up your subjective experience. This is the place where your history, culture, personality, and biology meet. And all of this shapes how you respond. Then comes the sixth sense, base sight, sound, smell, taste, touch, and mind. These are the gateways through which your experience is filtered. You don't just see a thing, you perceive it through memory and belief. You don't just hear a word, you react based on previous meanings and past emotional charges. So much happens before you even notice it's happening. That's the nature of conditioned experience. When one of the sense bases makes contact with the world, feeling arises, not always emotion, but that initial tone of pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral. This moment is critical, because how you relate to that feeling determines what comes next. If you are unaware, craving can arise, the desire to move toward pleasure or away from pain. That craving leads to clinging to thoughts, stories, identities, behaviors. It might be the moment you say something hurtful to protect your ego, or the moment you make a choice out of fear. It might be subtle, but it sets the next link in motion, becoming. Becoming is the solidifying of identity. I am this way. This is who I am. In that moment, your actions stop being responses and become part of the self-image you carry. That sense of self then births further moments, further actions, further consequences. And from this birth eventually comes suffering, grief, regret, shame, isolation, not because you are bad, because the conditions played out, the loop completed. But now, with awareness, you are seeing the loop, not to justify the past, but to understand it. Each link explains not what you are, but what was happening. There is a difference. You are not your ignorance. You are not your cravings. You are not your worst day. You are the one capable of seeing how all of this unfolded. And from that seeing, something changes. When you view your life through this lens, you begin to soften. You stop needing to punish the version of you who acted from confusion. You start realizing that clarity only comes later. You don't condemn the tree for having once been a seed. In the same way, you don't have to condemn yourself for choices made before you knew how to choose differently. This view also teaches patience. If your reactions were built through years of conditioning, they won't dissolve overnight. And that's okay. You're not here to erase your history. You're here to understand it. Enough that you stop repeating it blindly. That's what breaks the chain. Not self-hate, but clear, compassionate seeing. Dependent origination also frees you from the myth of control. You begin to understand that so much of what shaped you was not chosen. The culture you were raised in, the family dynamics, the nervous system you inherited, the societal messages you absorbed. You didn't design those things. But now, with awareness, you have the power to respond differently. And that response is where liberation begins. Forgiveness becomes less about feeling sorry and more about honoring the truth of your experience. You say to yourself, I understand now. I see what was happening. I see what led me here. And I choose to meet that truth, not with judgment, but with care. That is not weakness. That is wisdom. This understanding doesn't take away accountability. If you've harmed someone, the path of compassion includes making amends. But you do so not from guilt, but from clarity. You take responsibility not because you hate who you were, but because you now understand what was missing and you wish to offer something better. That's a different kind of effort, one that heals instead of harms. The beauty of this teaching is that it isn't just about the past. It becomes a map for every moment going forward. When you feel the urge to speak from anger, you pause and ask, what feeling just arose? What story am I believing? What craving is pulling me? Where can I soften the chain before it hardens into behavior? Over time, this practice creates spaciousness. You no longer react the same way to old triggers. You start to recognize the early signs. You interrupt the pattern not with control, but with kindness. You begin to rewrite your karma not by force, but by presence. And when the old reactions do arise, when the loop runs before you catch it, you don't spiral into self-hate. You trace it back. You see the links. You offer yourself the breath you didn't have before. You stay curious. You begin again. That is the power of dependent origination, not just as philosophy, but as compassion in action. It turns regret into understanding. It turns blame into insight. It shows you that every moment of suffering has a path, and every path can be walked with a different step. You are not static. Your actions are not your identity. Your past is not your prison. When you learn to see the causes clearly, you begin to loosen your grip on shame. And when shame loosens, love becomes possible, not just for others, but for yourself. This is not just intellectual insight. It is a way of living, a way of seeing yourself as part of a larger unfolding, not separate from the flow of conditions, but able now finally to respond with clarity, with softness, with care. So keep looking with open eyes. Keep tracing the path back, not to dwell, but to understand. Keep letting that understanding soften the harshness in your chest. And know this, every time you meet your past with compassion, every time you refuse to punish the parts of you that didn't know better, you are doing the deepest kind of healing. You are not erasing the path. You are illuminating it. Step by step, breath by breath. Keep going. There is more to see, and more space to open. When you begin to see your past through the lens of causes and conditions, you stop clinging so tightly to blame. You no longer mistake your former self for a failure. You begin to understand how habits formed, how pain was carried, how choices were shaped by what was known at the time. This deeper seeing allows something else to rise: acceptance, not passive resignation, but a soft and honest relationship with what is true. The fight within you starts to quiet. You realize you don't have to keep rewriting your history to deserve peace. But even with this clarity, there is still a tender edge. It comes from a deeper fear, the fear of change, of loss, of endings, of not being in control. It's one thing to accept your past, but how do you accept what is still unknown? This is where the 5 remembrances offer guidance. They are not meant to scare or overwhelm. They are meant to bring you closer to the truth, the kind of truth that liberates, not through comfort, but through intimacy. In Buddhist practice, these reflections are not morbid. They are considered tools of awakening. They don't diminish life, they deepen it, and through them you learn to accept yourself, not in spite of your fragility, but because of it. The first remembrance is this: I am of the nature to grow old. There is no escaping aging. At first, this may sound obvious, but when truly contemplated, it shifts something deep inside. Most of us live as if aging is a failure, as if changing bodies, slower thoughts, or deepening lines are things to be corrected or hidden. We resist aging not just physically, but emotionally. We tie our worth to youth, to agility, to productivity. And when we feel ourselves slipping from those things, we blame ourselves. But aging is not a mistake. It is a reminder that nothing is fixed, not even the version of ourselves we once believed was final. To accept aging is to soften the grip on identity. It is to allow who we are to evolve, not just externally, but internally. When you reflect on the reality of aging, you begin to let go of comparison. You stop asking, "Why don't I feel like I used to?" and begin asking, "What is here now? And how can I meet it with care?" This is not giving up. It is waking up. The second remembrance: I am of the nature to become ill. There is no escaping illness. Again, this is not a cause for despair. It is a recognition that being human means being vulnerable. Illness reminds us that control is an illusion, that even with all your wisdom and practice, the body has its own path. And yet, most people see illness as personal failure. If you feel anxious, you think you're spiritually weak. If you feel pain, you think you must have done something wrong. This belief runs deep. It turns natural suffering into shame. But when you reflect on illness with presence, something shifts. You realize that your pain doesn't make you less worthy of love or peace. It doesn't cancel your insight. It doesn't undo your goodness. It simply means you are living in a body that responds to the world with sensitivity. And this body deserves kindness, not only when it feels strong, but especially when it feels tender. The third remembrance is this: I am of the nature to die. There is no escaping death. This one is often the hardest. Even if we accept aging and illness, we still tend to push death into the distance. We talk around it. We avoid its weight. But death is not separate from life. It gives shape to everything. And when truly contemplated, it brings clarity. You begin to ask yourself different questions. What matters? Now? What can I release? Who do I need to forgive? Not just out there, but in here. Reflecting on death softens the harshness of your inner voice. If this moment could be your last, would you spend it criticizing yourself? Would you waste it rehearsing shame? Would you hold on to every regret like it defines your entire existence? Likely not. Death brings things into focus. It humbles the ego. It reveals that the version of yourself you're so busy judging is already impermanent. You don't have to make peace with a perfect version of you. You only have to make peace with the one that's here now. The fourth remembrance says, "All that is dear to me and everyone I love are of the nature to change. There is no way to escape being separated from them." This touches the heart in a different way. We often cling to relationships, to roles, to identities, thinking they will stay the same. But they, too, are subject to impermanence. And sometimes the greatest suffering comes not from what changed, but from expecting it not to. This remembrance invites you to love more freely, not with fear, not with control, but with presence. When you accept that all things change, you stop grasping. You begin to cherish, not cling. And most importantly, you begin to extend that same grace inward. You understand that just as your loved ones are always changing, so are you. The mistakes you made came from an earlier version of you. The reactions, the defenses, the choices, they belong to someone still learning. And that version of you is already gone. The fifth and final remembrance is this: my actions are my only true belongings. They are the ground upon which I stand. I cannot escape the consequences of my actions. This is not meant to produce fear. It is meant to awaken responsibility. Not guilt, but clarity. This teaching does not say, "You are your actions." It says, "Your actions shape the direction of your life." And that means every choice matters. Not because you are trying to earn worth, but because your life responds to the energy you bring. Reflecting on this truth helps you reclaim your agency. You may not have chosen your early conditions, but you can choose how you respond to them now. You can choose what to carry forward. You can choose to stop the patterns that brought pain. And in doing so, you can shape your future not by force, but by intention. Together, these 5 remembrances are not dark truths. They are grounding ones. They bring you back to what's real. They help you stop pretending you're separate from the rest of life. They remind you that you don't need to hold yourself to inhuman standards. You don't need to perfect your way into peace. You need only to see clearly, to feel deeply, and to meet each moment with honesty. When you reflect on these truths regularly, shame begins to dissolve. Not because the past is erased, but because you see it in context. You see that suffering is not personal, it is part of the human path. You see that your struggles are not defects, they are signs of contact with reality. You stop expecting yourself to be invincible. You stop waiting to become someone else before you can feel worthy. These reflections can be used in practice, in stillness, in silence. You don't need to do anything fancy. Just speak them gently to yourself. Let the words land. Let the meanings grow over time. Let them become part of your understanding. And when resistance arises, when your mind says, "This is too much," remember that resistance is also natural. It, too, is part of the path. You don't have to fight it. Just breathe. Just stay. Let the reflection return you to yourself not as someone broken, but as someone waking up. Self-acceptance is not the final goal. It is the beginning of a different way of being, a way that includes everything, that rejects nothing, that welcomes all that you are not in spite of your humanity, but because of it. You are already enough to begin. Let these truths remind you. Let them loosen the grip of perfection. Let them soften the voice of shame. Let them return you to what matters most. Stay close. There's more to see, and more peace waiting to unfold. Keep walking. Keep meeting yourself. Here, one breath, one truth, one remembrance at a time. As you sit with the 5 remembrances, something begins to loosen. Not just your grip on who you think you should be, but your attachment to understanding every moment of your past. You start to feel the weight of all the stories you've told yourself about failure, all the conclusions you've drawn about what you did wrong and why. You start to see that clarity doesn't always come when you want it, that peace doesn't always arrive with explanations. You begin to understand that there is a kind of wisdom that exists beyond knowing, that not every wound needs to be dissected before it can begin to heal. This is where the parable of the poisoned arrow speaks with incredible relevance. A story the Buddha once told, not to dismiss curiosity, but to redirect our energy toward what truly matters. In the parable, a man is struck by a poisoned arrow. Instead of asking for help, he insists on knowing who shot it, what caste the shooter belonged to, what their name was, what kind of bow was used. He says he won't allow the arrow to be removed until he has all the answers. The Buddha's point was simple. If the man waits for perfect understanding, he will die before he begins to heal. This story is not only about philosophy, it is about the mind's tendency to cling to analysis, even when the body is in pain. And nowhere is that more obvious than in the process of self-forgiveness. When we've made mistakes, when we carry regret or shame, we often feel we must first solve the mystery of who we are. We think we must understand exactly why we acted as we did, what it says about us, what part of us failed. We become obsessed with sorting through the past for answers, believing that only when everything is fully explained will we have permission to let go. But healing doesn't 39, it wait for perfect logic. The wound is already here, and the longer you delay tending to it, the deeper it spreads. This is not to say that reflection isn't useful. It's only to say that it must come second, not first. The first step is care. The first step is presence. The first step is removing the arrow. Many people think they need closure before they can rest. They want to know why they stayed too long, why they lashed out, why they said something they now regret. And sometimes those answers never arrive in the way you expect. But while you're stuck in that search, you postpone the only thing that can actually bring relief: compassion. Forgiveness isn't the end of healing, it's part of how it begins. When you are wounded, you are vulnerable. That vulnerability needs tending. The mind may be spinning with questions, but the heart is asking for care. The deeper you go into reflection without compassion, the more likely you are to turn understanding into blame. You might find reasons, but use them as evidence against yourself. You might trace back the pattern, but do so with judgment. This is how inquiry becomes punishment. It no longer seeks to understand, it seeks to confirm a painful narrative. The poisoned arrow story reminds us that even if answers do matter, they are secondary to presence. And that presence must begin now, even if clarity hasn't yet arrived. The moment you offer yourself kindness, not because you understand everything, but because you are in pain, that is when healing truly begins. That is when the energy that was trapped in guilt starts to move. That is when softness enters the body, not because the questions are answered, but because the heart has been heard. Self-forgiveness in this way requires humility. It means being willing to accept that you may never know everything, that some choices were made under fog, that some parts of your past were shaped by forces you didn't see clearly at the time, that some truths might not fully reveal themselves, and even so, you are allowed to heal. This is hard for the mind to accept, especially if you're used to solving problems, analyzing patterns, fixing what's broken. You might think, but if I let go now, I'm avoiding responsibility. But forgiveness is not avoidance, it's engagement. You are choosing to relate to your pain with honesty. You are choosing to care for the part of you that has already suffered enough. You are removing the arrow, not ignoring it. The need to understand everything often comes from fear. Fear that if you don't figure it all out, you'll repeat the mistake. That if you don't solve the puzzle, you'll stay stuck. But understanding without compassion doesn't change behavior, it only deepens the shame. What does change behavior is awareness born from love. When you care for your wound, you begin to understand it differently. You see it with clarity, not fear. And that clarity naturally guides your future choices. There are also times when the demand for understanding is a disguise, a way to delay facing what hurts. It can feel safer to stay in the realm of thinking than to sit with the raw truth of feeling. But healing isn't about thinking your way out. It's about feeling your way through. And that starts with acknowledging what is, not waiting for the full backstory. This moment is what's here. This pain is what's here. This breath is what's here. You begin with that. You can reflect more deeply later. But first, tend to yourself like someone who is bleeding. Wrap yourself in care. Say what you would say to someone else in your place. You don't need to have all the answers right now. You just need to breathe, to rest, to let your body know you are safe. That, too, is wisdom. That, too, is the path. And when the questions return, as they will, you can meet them more gently. You can say, I'm willing to understand, but not at the cost of compassion. You don't have to let the mind take over. You can inquire slowly, with space, with kindness, with the awareness that truth arises more clearly when the heart is open, not when it's clenched. This story also reminds us of time, that life does not pause while we wait for clarity, that healing cannot be postponed without consequence. There is urgency, but not the urgency of analysis, the urgency of care, of presence, of knowing that what you offer yourself today shapes how you feel tomorrow. The longer you wait to remove the arrow, the more the wound hardens. You don't need to know who you were in order to love who you are. You don't need to understand why you acted as you did to begin again. Starting fresh doesn't mean forgetting. It means releasing the demand for certainty. It means choosing softness over delay. And when the voice rises that says, but I haven't figured it all out yet, you can smile at it. You can thank it for trying to protect you. And then you can say, not now. Right now, I choose to heal. Over time, this practice becomes second nature. You begin to trust that not knowing is not failure. It's a phase. You stop needing everything to make sense before you feel peace. You stop needing to prove that you understand before you deserve to rest. You begin to see that understanding often comes after forgiveness, not before. That clarity blooms best in soft soil, not in judgment. This is how you remove the arrow, by placing your attention where it is needed most. On the wound itself, on the breath that steadies you, on the voice that says, it's okay to feel this, it's okay to not have all the pieces, it's okay to be in process. The Buddha didn't tell this story to dismiss the value of wisdom. He told it to remind us that wisdom is only useful when it's alive, when it serves healing, when it's applied to the moment, not just imagined for the future. You are already wise when you stop abandoning yourself in pursuit of perfect knowledge. You are already growing when you stop asking the pain to explain itself before you let it go. So let this be a turning point. You don't need to wait. You don't need to be certain. You only need to be willing. The arrow is already here. Your healing begins the moment you say, I don't need all the answers. I just need to be here with what's real. Keep walking. The rest will unfold. One breath, one release, one gentle choice at a time. The arrow has been removed. You didn't wait for the perfect explanation. You didn't demand absolute clarity. You turned toward what was wounded, even when you didn't fully understand why it hurt so much. You chose presence instead of analysis, softness instead of delay. That choice matters. It marks a turning point not only in how you heal, but in how you relate to the part of you that still struggles to forgive. You've stopped waiting for permission. You've stopped treating your pain like a puzzle to be solved. Now something new can begin, a deeper, more stable form of self-honesty, the kind that doesn't 39 rush to conclusions or bury its feelings, the kind that walks the middle path between personal responsibility and compassion. This balance between accountability and gentleness is something that Buddhist monastics have been practicing for centuries, not just as a philosophy, but as a lived rhythm. In monastic life, failure is not denied. It's acknowledged. It's even expected. But what makes the difference is how it's held. The confession rituals that take place within monasteries aren't designed to shame. They're designed to restore clarity, to maintain community harmony, and most importantly, to allow each individual to return to themselves with greater integrity. And while you may not live in a monastery, the principles behind these practices offer powerful insight into how forgiveness can become not a dramatic one-time act, but a steady, repeating rhythm. The process of confession in monastic life is structured, but not punitive. It is called pabaja, not just confession, but the broader ordination and training process through which one enters and maintains the discipline of the path. Within this context, monks regularly gather to reflect on their actions and confess missteps. These are not criminal offenses. They're often subtle, breaking a rule of speech, failing to carry out a duty, giving in to frustration. What matters is not the severity of the act, but the willingness to meet it with honesty. Confession in this sense is not a performance. It is a practice of alignment, a way of saying, I drifted and I am returning. It doesn't focus on identity, it focuses on behavior. This is crucial because in modern life, we often collapse behavior into identity. We say, I acted selfishly, and quickly move to, I am selfish. But monks are trained to keep that distinction clear. The act is named, the intention behind it is explored, and then it is released, not denied, not dramatized, not denied. It is allowed to pass like weather. You may not have a community of monastics around you, but the spirit of this ritual can be brought into your own life. It starts with the recognition that you will make mistakes. You will forget your values. You will speak carelessly. You will turn away from what you meant to stay present with. This is not because you are broken. It is because you are human. And like those in robes, you too deserve a way to return. A rhythm to help you stay connected, not through punishment, but through reflection. Start by understanding the attitude behind confession. It's not self-criticism, it's self-responsibility with tenderness. It's the willingness to stop pretending and speak the truth, even if only to yourself. You don't need to wait until a mistake grows heavy enough to break you. You can meet it early. You can say, "Yes, I strayed." And you can say it without adding, "Therefore I am bad." In monastic life, confession is often done in pairs or small groups. It's relational, not because someone else needs to fix you, but because being witnessed helps dissolve shame. You are not expected to carry your struggles alone. This is a lesson that applies just as powerfully in lay life. If there's someone you trust, a friend, a mentor, a therapist, you can share what you've been holding, not to be forgiven by them, but to hear yourself speak the truth out loud in a safe space. This can be deeply relieving, not because it erases the mistake, but because it loosens your fear around it. But if you don't have someone to speak to, the practice can still live in solitude. You can create your own rhythm of reflection. Perhaps once a week, perhaps in the evening, you sit and look back gently, not with a harsh gaze, but with sincere curiosity. What pulled me off balance? Where did I act from fear or habit? What did I avoid, and why? You don't need to answer all these questions with certainty. Just naming them honestly is enough to begin. The act of seeing brings you back. The beauty of this practice is that it builds trust, not just with others, but with yourself. When you regularly meet your mistakes with awareness instead of avoidance, you stop fearing them so much. You begin to know that whatever arises, you will face it, you will stay with it, you will learn from it. That self-trust is a kind of freedom. It means you don't have to pretend. It means your worth doesn't collapse under imperfection. This is the gift that monastic confession offers, a structure for imperfection that leads to deeper connection. You're not trying to become flawless. You're learning how to live honestly within your limitations. And that honesty is where grace enters, not as something given to you from outside, but as something that rises from within, each time you return without shame. In monasteries, these practices are repeated. There is no illusion that one confession will resolve everything. The process is cyclical, regular, integrated. It's not emotional release for its own sake. It's rhythm. You too can live this rhythm. You can stop waiting for dramatic absolution and begin building quiet rituals of return. They don't need to be elaborate. A moment of stillness, a few words spoken with sincerity, a choice to begin again, that's enough. This rhythm also invites you to be more patient with others. Once you see how difficult it is to forgive yourself, you become slower to demand that others meet your needs perfectly. You understand that repair is a process, that transformation takes time, and that everyone is in some stage of returning to their own center. What monastics model for us is that the path is not defined by how few mistakes you make, but by how consistently you respond to them with awareness. That's a powerful shift. It means you can stop fearing your failures. You can meet them like old teachers. You can listen to them, learn from them, and then let them go. You might still struggle with guilt. That's normal. Even monks do. But the practice reminds you, guilt is not your punishment. It is your signal. It tells you that something in you wants to live in integrity. And that longing is not something to suppress. It's something to honor. So when you feel the tightness of regret, pause. Don't rush to defend or deny. Just sit. Feel the discomfort. Speak to it. And gently ask, what truth have I forgotten? When you hear the answer not as judgment, but as insight you are already returning. This practice is gentle, but it is not passive. It requires effort, not the effort of performance, but the effort of honesty, the effort of showing up, even when it's uncomfortable, the effort of continuing, even when you'd rather quit. Over time, you begin to notice the space that opens in you. You no longer carry your mistakes like heavy secrets. You hold them with care, like reminders. And in doing so, you become more grounded, more present, more available to your own life. This is the deep work of self-forgiveness, not a single decision, but a repeated rhythm, a way of living that makes room for every part of you, even the ones that forget, that fall short, that break the rules they meant to follow. You don't need to fear those parts. You only need to include them in the practice. And so you return, not because you are broken, but because you belong here, because your heart, like every heart, deserves the chance to keep opening, not once, but over and over, without punishment, without delay. Let this be your rhythm now, a rhythm of return, a rhythm of reflection, a rhythm of forgiving yourself, not because you always understand what happened, but because you are willing to keep meeting it with truth. Keep walking, there is more to remember, and always more room to begin again. After learning to return to yourself again and again through the gentle structure of monastic confession, something in you begins to shift. You stop seeing your struggles as personal flaws and start understanding them as part of a rhythm, falling, noticing, returning. Forgiveness becomes a practice, not an outcome, a process of realignment. But there are times when the pain doesn't sit in your thoughts alone. It lives deeper, somewhere in the body, somewhere in the breath, somewhere in the chest or belly or throat. You can name the feeling, you can sit with it, you can reflect, and still it lingers. Not because you're doing something wrong, but because some wounds ask not to be solved. They ask to be felt, released, and integrated in a different language. That language is vibration, that doorway is sound, and in Buddhist tradition, chanting offers exactly this, a path of healing that bypasses analysis and enters through the body's own frequency, not as performance, not as proof of devotion, but as a direct way to shift energy, transform inner resistance, and allow forgiveness to move through you, not just mentally, but physically, emotionally, somatically. When self-hatred has sunk into your nervous system, into your posture, into the tension in your voice, words alone may not be enough. But vibration carries where language cannot. Chanting in Buddhism is not just about reciting sacred phrases. It is about aligning yourself with qualities that live inside those words: compassion, peace, wisdom, steadiness. Mantras are not magic. Spells, they are patterns. And when you repeat them, you're not forcing belief. You're training your nervous system into presence. You are tuning your body to a deeper truth than the one shame keeps repeating. That truth says, you are not beyond care. You are not separate from what is sacred. You are not the exception. Many people feel awkward when they first begin chanting. The voice may feel unfamiliar. Doubt might rise. You may wonder if you're doing it right. These are not obstacles, they are part of the process. In fact, they're often signs that your body is starting to wake up, not to performance, but to presence. The shame that lived in silence begins to move. And yes, that can feel strange. But strange is not wrong. It's the space where change happens. When you chant, especially when your intention is self-forgiveness, the sound becomes a carrier of care. You are not speaking at yourself. You are surrounding yourself. You are bathing your system in the fort vibration of remembrance, of wholeness, of warmth. This doesn't mean you must believe every word. You may not feel worthy. You may not feel peaceful. That's okay. The mantra holds the vibration for you until you can join it. You repeat it not because you feel the truth in that moment, but because you want to. And over time you begin to. Some Buddhist chants are in Pali or Sanskrit. You don't need to translate every syllable to feel their effect. The meaning is carried not just in the word, but in the rhythm, the tone, the breath. That said, understanding what a chant evokes can support your practice. For example, chanting Om Mani Padme Hum is a call to compassion toward others, yes, but also toward yourself. It points to the jewel of wisdom inside the lotus of suffering. It says that even your pain contains insight. Even your wounds are worthy of light. When you repeat this mantra aloud, feel where the sound lands in your body. Let it resonate in your chest, your throat, your belly. You are not just saying something, you are activating something. The self that still believes it is beyond love hears the vibration and begins to soften, not because you are convincing it, but because you are including it. Another chant, Namo Amitabha Buddha, calls on the limitless light of the awakened mind. It reminds you that liberation is not far away, it is your nature. When shame says, you'll never get there, this chant says, you're already home. And with each repetition, that reminder starts to move from an idea into an experience. But you don't need a specific chant to begin. You can use simple phrases in your own language. Words like, I forgive myself. I am allowed to rest. I return to kindness, repeated in rhythm with the breath. What matters most is not the phrase, but the sincerity behind it. You are not trying to force transformation. You are offering space for it. Chanting regularly creates a kind of energetic memory. Your body begins to associate the sound with safety, with softness, with return. So when shame arises in daily life, when the old voices come back, you don't have to argue with them. You simply return to the breath and hum the chant silently. You shift the vibration inside, and the pattern begins to break. This is how sound becomes healing, not by overpowering pain, but by meeting it with something steady, something ancient, something inside you that has not forgotten how to hold you. It's important to remember that chanting is not about reaching a special state. It's not about bliss. It's not about escaping your feelings. It's about being more fully here, with your discomfort, with your longing, with your complexity. The voice is a bridge between your inner and outer world, and when used with intention, it can become one of the most powerful tools for forgiveness you will ever know. Sometimes it's enough to chant for a few minutes, sometimes longer. There are no rules. You can chant in the morning to begin the day with steadiness. You can chant before sleep to soothe the nervous system. You can chant while walking, while sitting, while lying down. What matters is not posture, but presence, not volume, but sincerity. And if the voice trembles, let it. That tremble is part of the healing. It means something long buried is beginning to rise. Let it come. Let the sound carry it. You don't have to understand every emotion that moves. You only have to stay with it, to trust that your body knows how to release what it no longer needs. In this way, chanting becomes more than practice, it becomes relationship, a way to keep meeting yourself with care. No matter how many times shame returns, You don't need to fight the shame. You don't need to silence it. You only need to surround it with sound until it quiets on its own. This is not a technique for people who are already whole. This is for the tired, the hurting, the ones who still feel separate, the ones who have tried everything else. This is not for performance. This is for return. So when you don't know how to forgive yourself, chant anyway. When you don't believe the words, chant anyway. When your body feels heavy and your mind restless, chant anyway. Not because you're trying to get somewhere, but because chanting helps you stay. And over time, without needing to know how, you begin to feel different. The breath moves more freely, the heart tightens less, the inner voice softens, not because you forced it, but because you vibrated something deeper into motion, something ancient, something true. Let the chant be your companion now. Let it hold what your thoughts cannot. Let it do the work your logic can't reach. You are not broken. You are only learning how to include what was once left out. Sound helps you remember. Keep chanting. You are returning. One breath, one vibration, one sacred syllable at a time. After spending time with the healing energy of chanting, something deeper begins to settle in the body. You feel the difference, because everything is suddenly clear or resolved, but because the rhythm of your voice has softened the tension that logic could never reach. You've begun to relate to your wounds as something that can be tended to with sound, not silence. You've learned that you don't need to understand everything for healing to begin. But there are still places within you that feel ancient, heavy in a way that has no obvious cause. Certain fears, patterns, or emotions seem to appear without a clear beginning. You've searched for explanations in this life and found none that fully satisfy. The steens, shame runs deeper than memory. The grief rises from somewhere older than thought. This is where the Buddhist understanding of the wheel of birth, or samsara, opens a different kind of doorway. It doesn't demand belief in reincarnation. It doesn't require full certainty about past lives. What it offers is a compassionate framework, one that honors the complexity of your inner world and gives you permission to feel what cannot be explained. It tells you that emotional residue is real, even when its source is hidden, and that forgiveness too may be part of a continuum that stretches beyond this lifetime. There are moments when pain arises in ways that don't match the current narrative. You feel intense guilt, but can't find the action to justify it. You feel like you've carried a burden for years, yet no one remembers giving it to you. In the teachings of karma, this is not always dismissed as random. It is seen as a continuation. The unfinished energy of actions, choices, attachments, and aversions that ripple through many lifetimes, not as punishment, but as influence. And while you cannot trace every thread of cause and effect, you can meet what arises now with wisdom. Forgiveness in this view becomes something more expansive. You are no longer just forgiving a single act in a single life. You are softening the impact of old patterns that may have been echoing through time. You are healing not only for your current self, but for all the versions of you that came before. You are choosing peace, even if you don't fully understand the origin of the unrest. This approach doesn't mean you avoid responsibility. It simply acknowledges that some burdens were inherited, not invented. Some fears were passed down, not created from scratch. You are not being asked to carry them forever. You are being invited to release them, even if you can't name them. Karmic. Forgiveness isn't about finding every answer. It's about bringing care to every feeling that arises. Start by creating a space where you can honor this wider timeline. You don't need to know who you were or what happened. Begin by feeling into the energy that asks for attention. Perhaps there's a repeated emotions hame, fear, guilt, anger, that shows up even when you've addressed all known causes. Instead of rejecting it, pause. Place your hand on the part of your body where it lives. Breathe with it. Speak to it like an old friend, not a threat. You can say, "If you are from this life, I honor you. If you are from before, I welcome you. If you are ready to be released, I'm here now." These words are not formulas. They are gestures of recognition. You are letting the feeling know that it no longer has to carry itself alone, that its story, whether known or unknown, is safe to unravel. Some people find it helpful to create rituals for karmic release. You might light a candle, offer a chant, or write a letter to an unknown past self. You can begin with, "I don't know who you were or what you went through, but I know that something remains, and I'm here now to meet it with care." Let the papa do. Words come without force. Let the emotion move at its own pace. Forgiving past life patterns isn't about spiritual performance. It's not about convincing yourself that you're more evolved. It's about recognizing that something ancient within you is still waiting to be seen. Not because it's dangerous, but because it was never given a chance to rest. You are the resting place. Now, the one who can say, "This ends here." Sometimes this healing will feel subtle. Other times it will bring waves of emotion that seem to come from nowhere. Tears you can't explain. Grief that doesn't have a name. That's not irrational. That's integration. The nervous system is responding to the release of something that had no voice before. You don't need to interpret it. You only need to stay present. This view also helps you meet others with more compassion. If you believe that each person is shaped by lifetimes of causes and conditions, you begin to soften your judgments. You stop expecting people to make sense according to your logic. You start seeing that we are all carrying things we don't remember. We are all healing from wounds we didn't ask for. This doesn't mean you allow harm. It means you understand that healing isn't always linear, that forgiveness isn't always clean, that love must include mystery. In Buddhist teachings, the wheel of birth is not a punishment, it's a continuation. And continuation means that healing is never wasted. Every act of forgiveness you offer to yourself now ripples backward and forward. You cannot undo what has happened, but you can interrupt what continues. You can choose gentleness where once there was fear. You can offer space where once there was pressure. You can release what was never yours to carry. This process also invites a different kind of humility. You begin to see that not every impulse, reaction, or belief is personal. Much of it is inherited through culture, family, karma, memory. You stop identifying so tightly with every thought. And when identity loosens, so does shame. You see that the version of you who suffers is not the final word. It is just one point in a long unfolding. And in that unfolding, you are allowed to grow. You don't need to remember your past lives for this to matter. You only need to respect that your present life includes threads that go beyond what you can see. And instead of fearing that, you can feel gratitude. Gratitude that your healing today reaches deeper than you know. Gratitude that you get to be the one who chooses differently. Gratitude that you are the resting place for all the selves that came before. When the emotions rise and you don't know why, you don't have to panic. You can say, "Something is releasing. I don't need to name it. I just need to stay." This is how you let go without abandoning yourself. This is how karmic healing becomes a path of presence, not performance. There's also beauty in realizing that you are not alone in this. Across generations, across cultures, across histories, people have sat with the unknown and chosen to offer love. You are part of that lineage. Your healing adds to it, not as something grand, but as something steady, a quiet yes to the question, is it possible to begin again? Forgiveness in the wheel of birth means trusting the unseen, trusting that even the sorrow you can't explain is worth your attention, trusting that even if no one understands, your willingness to care still matters, trusting that healing doesn't require certainty-only presence. So let the past be what it is. Let it rise and fall in waves of sensation. Let your breath hold it without needing to control it. Let your heart speak to the pain without needing to explain it. You are not here to make perfect sense of everything. You are here to love what was left unloved. You are here to offer what no one else could. You are here to stop the repetition by choosing rest over reaction. And that choice, again and again, is what turns karmic weight into karmic release. Keep trusting this process. You don't need proof. You only need to stay close to what's real. If it asks for space, give it space. If it asks for stillness, give it stillness. If it asks for tears, let them fall. There is no right way to do this. There is only your willingness to return to what's waiting inside you. The wheel keeps turning, but you no longer have to turn in circles with it. You can pause, you can witness, you can offer care. That is the freedom within samsara, not escaping it, but meeting it with enough clarity that the old patterns begin to lose their grip. You are already doing it. Let that be enough. Let the past rest where it is. Let yourself move forward with a little more softness, a little less weight. Keep walking. The path is still open, and your steps are already rewriting the story. You've walked through a sacred path tonitantly, breath by breath, memory by memory. You've released the weight of misunderstood karma, softened the grip of perfectionism, and stepped out of the cycles of inner blame. You've learned to meet yourself not with judgment, but with reverence. From the deities not pakes, stillness of the breath, to the quiet wisdom of the lotus heart, from karmic echoes across lifetimes to the loving voice of your inner noble friend. You've begun the most important journey of all the provocs, journey home to yourself, not by force, not by fixing, but by forgiveness. Self-forgiveness isn't something you finally achieve. It's something you practice again and again, in the softest ways, through stillness, through chanting, through presence, through kindness that does not demand anything in return. Tonight, you didn't just listen, you remembered, you returned. And even if just one part of you feels lighter now, then that is enough. Because this is the work that changes everything. If these teachings moved something inside you, even something small, leave a comment below. Write, "I'm coming home." Let's honor the quiet victories together. And if you'd like to keep walking this path with more gentle teachings, more guided wisdom, more spaces to rest, subscribe to the channel and tap the bell. There's so much more waiting for you. Until next time, sleep softly, and may your breath continue what tonight began.